They said Jonas Reed was the poorest man in Kansas, a farmer with nothing but dirt under his nails and dreams in his pockets. When Evelyn Cross was sold to him like livestock to pay her father's gambling debts, the whole town whispered she'd wasted her youth on a man who couldn't even afford shoes. But what Jonas did on their wedding night didn't just shock everyone. It shattered everything Evelyn thought she knew about love, power, and what it truly means to be rich. Stay with me until the end, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The morning Evelyn Cross turned 19, she woke to the sound of her mother crying. It wasn't the soft, dignified weeping that accompanied funerals or farewells. This was raw and guttural, the kind of crying that came from somewhere deep in the bones, where shame and desperation lived together in the dark. Evelyn lay still in her narrow bed, staring at the water-stained ceiling of their boarding house room, and felt her stomach turn to stone. She already knew. Somehow, she already knew. Evelyn. Her mother's voice cracked through the thin walls. Get dressed. Your father needs to speak with you. The boarding house on the edge of Lawrence, Kansas, had been their home for 3 months, ever since the bank had taken their real house, the one with the garden and the porch swing, and the room that used to be Evelyn's, painted yellow like sunshine. Her father, Thomas Cross, had promised it was temporary. He'd promised a lot of things. Evelyn dressed slowly, her fingers clumsy on the buttons of her only good dress, pale blue cotton, faded at the seams but still presentable. She braided her dark hair with mechanical precision, watching her own face in the cracked mirror above the wash basin. Brown eyes stared back at her, too wide, too frightened. She looked like a girl about to be sentenced. When she entered the main room, her father sat hunched at the table, his head in his hands. He'd aged a decade in the past year. Gray streaked his temples now, and his shoulders curved inward like he was trying to disappear into himself. Her mother stood by the window, arms wrapped tight around her middle, staring out at nothing. Sit down, Evie. Her father's voice was barely a whisper. She sat. The chair felt like a trap. Thomas Cross lifted his head, and Evelyn's heart cracked at the sight of his face. His eyes were red-rimmed, hollow. The man who used to toss her in the air and call her his little songbird was gone, replaced by this broken stranger. I've made arrangements, he said. The words hung in the air like smoke. What kind of arrangements? Evelyn's voice came out steadier than she felt. You're to be married, today. The room tilted. What? There's a farmer, Jonas Reed. He's agreed to settle my debts in exchange for... Thomas couldn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Evelyn's mother let out a choked sob. Thomas, please, there's no other way. Her father slammed his palm on the table, and they both flinched. Do you understand? I owe Marcus Thornton $800. $800 I don't have and can never repay. He's threatened to have me arrested, and you know what they do to debtors in this territory. They'll send me to the labor camps, or worse. This family will have nothing. Nothing. So you're selling me. Evelyn heard herself say the words as if from a great distance. Like a horse. Or a piece of furniture. It's not like that. Then what is it like, Father? She stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the wooden floor. You're trading your daughter to a stranger to pay for your gambling debts. How is that anything other than a sale? Her mother turned from the window, mascara streaking her pale cheeks. Evelyn, please try to understand. We have no choice. If we did, do you think we would? You always have a choice. Evelyn's hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against her dress to still them. You could sell our belongings. You could work. You could do anything except this. Thomas stood, his face hardening. I've sold everything worth selling. I've worked every job that would have me. This is the only option left, and you will accept it with grace because I am still your father and you will obey me. The room fell silent, except for the ticking of the cheap clock on the mantel. Evelyn looked at her mother, searching for an ally, for someone who would stand between her and this nightmare. But her mother only turned back to the window, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. What kind of man is he? Evelyn finally asked, her voice hollow. Her father sat back down heavily. I'm told he's decent, a hard worker. He owns a small farm outside of town. How old is he? 26. And why would a 26-year-old farmer agree to this? Why would he pay $800 for a wife he's never met? Thomas rubbed his face with both hands. I don't know, Evie. I didn't ask. I was drowning, and he threw me a rope, and I took it. That's all I know. When do I meet him? At the church. In 2 hours. Eveline felt her knees go weak. She gripped the back of the chair. 2 hours? You're telling me this 2 hours before I'm supposed to marry a stranger? We thought it would be easier this way, her mother whispered. Less time to think about it. To think about the fact that you're destroying my life, you mean. Eveline Louise Cross. Her father's voice was sharp now, desperate. I know you're scared. I know this isn't what you wanted. But you're 19 years old and unwed with no prospects and no dowry. In this territory, in these times, that's as good as a death sentence for a woman. At least this way you'll have a home, a husband, a chance at a life. A chance at a life? Eveline laughed, and it came out broken. Or a life sentence. No one answered. The Church of the Holy Redeemer sat at the end of Main Street like a weathered sentinel, its white paint peeling in long strips that revealed gray wood underneath. Eveline had been baptized there as a child, back when Lawrence was just beginning to grow from a frontier outpost into something resembling a town. She'd sung in the choir every Sunday until her voice broke from crying after her first love, Daniel Patterson, married someone else. Now she stood in the vestibule in that same faded blue dress, her mother's hands gripping her shoulders so tightly it hurt. Stand up straight, Margaret Cross hissed, and for God's sake, smile. You look like you're going to a funeral. Aren't I? Eveline whispered. Her mother's grip tightened, nails digging in. This self-pity doesn't become you. Many women have married under worse circumstances. At least Jonas Reed is young and able-bodied. At least he's not cruel. How would you know if he's cruel? Have you even met him? Margaret's jaw clenched. Your father spoke with him yesterday. He seemed adequate. Adequate. The words settled over Eveline like ash. Through the crack in the vestibule door, she could see the church's interior. A dozen people sat scattered in the pews, mostly curious neighbors and gossips who'd heard about the hasty wedding and come to witness the spectacle. Reverend Morrison stood at the altar, his Bible open, his expression carefully neutral, and beside him stood a man. Eveline's breath caught. Jonas Reed was tall, taller than she'd expected, with broad shoulders that strained against a threadbare jacket that looked like it had been mended a dozen times. His hair was dark, almost black, and fell across his forehead in a way that suggested he'd tried to comb it back but given up halfway. His face was angular, weathered from sun and wind, with a jaw that looked like it had been carved from stone. But it was his hands that caught her attention. Even from this distance, she could see they were scarred and calloused, the hands of someone who'd worked every day of his life and expected to work every day until he died. He stood perfectly still, staring at the altar, his expression unreadable. He's waiting, her mother said. Don't keep him longer than necessary. Eveline wanted to run. Every fiber of her being screamed at her to turn and flee through the back door, to run until her lungs burned and her legs gave out, to disappear into the vast Kansas prairie and never look back. But where would she go? She had no money, no family, except these two who had sold her, no skills beyond needlework and basic arithmetic. A woman alone on the frontier was prey for men, for weather, for circumstance. This was survival. Nothing more, nothing less. The organ began to play, a thin, reedy version of a wedding march that sounded more like a dirge. Her father appeared beside her, offering his arm. His hands were shaking as badly as hers. Evie, he whispered, and his voice broke on her name. I'm so sorry. She didn't answer. She couldn't trust herself to speak without screaming. They walked down the aisle together, and Eveline felt every eye in the church on her. She heard the whispers. Poor girl, so young. I heard he paid $800 for her, like buying a horse. What kind of man does that? Can't find a wife the normal way? She could do worse. At least Reed's got a strong back. Strong back won't keep her warm at night when she realizes she's married to a dirt farmer with nothing to his name. The whispers felt like insects crawling on her skin. Jonas Reed turned as she approached, and their eyes met for the first time. His eyes were gray, the color of storm clouds over the prairie. For a moment, something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or recognition, but it vanished so quickly she might have imagined it. Her father placed her hand in Jonas's, and Evelyn felt the roughness of those scarred palms against her skin. His grip was gentle, too gentle, like he was afraid she might shatter. "Take care of her," Thomas whispered, so low only the three of them could hear. Jonas nodded once. "I will." And then her father was gone, retreating to the front pew where her mother sat weeping into a handkerchief. Reverend Morrison cleared his throat. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today in the sight of God, and these witnesses to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony. Marriage is not to be entered into lightly, but reverently, deliberately, and in accordance with the purposes for which it was instituted by God." Evelyn barely heard the words. Her heart was pounding so loudly it drowned out everything else. She stared at Jonas Reed's chest, at the frayed collar of his shirt, at a button that didn't quite match the others. "Jonas Reed, do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" "I do." His voice was deep and quiet, steady as bedrock. "And do you, Evelyn Cross, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" The words stuck in her throat. She couldn't say them, couldn't force out the lie that would chain her to this stranger forever. Jonas's hand tightened slightly around hers, not forceful, but reassuring. When she looked up, he was watching her with those storm cloud eyes, and something in his expression was unexpectedly kind. "It's all right," he whispered, so softly only she could hear. "You don't have to be afraid." The kindness broke something inside her. Tears blurred her vision. "I do," she whispered. "Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Kansas and Almighty God, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." Jonas hesitated. For a long moment they stood there, hands joined, and Evelyn realized he was waiting for permission. She gave the smallest nod, and he leaned down and pressed his lips to her forehead, not her mouth, but her forehead, so gently it felt more like a promise than a kiss. "Thank you," he murmured. "Thank you for trusting me." But she hadn't trusted him. She hadn't trusted anyone. She'd simply run out of choices. Outside the church, her mother embraced her with desperate force. "Write to us," Margaret sobbed. "Please write to us so we know you're all right." Evelyn stood stiff in her mother's arms, unable to return the embrace. "Why? So you can sleep better at night knowing you sold me to a stranger?" Her mother pulled back, stung. "Don't be cruel, Evelyn. We did what we had to do." "No, you did what was easiest for you." Her father approached, his hands hanging uselessly at his sides. "Evie, please, try to understand." "I understand perfectly, Father. You gambled away everything we had, and when you couldn't pay your debts, you paid them with me." She stepped back out of reach. "I hope it was worth it." Jonas appeared beside her, a weathered canvas bag in his hand. "The wagon's ready," he said quietly. He nodded respectfully to her parents. "Mr. Cross." "Mrs. Cross." Thomas gripped Jonas's shoulder. "You'll take care of her?" "I gave you my word," Jonas said. There was an edge to his voice now, something harder. "A man's word is all he's got out here." He helped Evelyn onto the wagon seat, a simple farm wagon pulled by a tired-looking mule with one ear shorter than the other. The wagon bed was empty except for a few supplies covered with a tarp. As Jonas climbed up beside her and took the reins, people gathered on the church steps to watch them leave. The gossiping continued. "She'll be pregnant within the month, mark my words." "Poor thing. Married to a man with nothing but dirt and dreams. My husband says Reed's place is barely standing, 2 rooms and a leaky roof." A pretty girl like that, wasted on a poor farmer. What a shame. Jonas's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He clicked his tongue, and the mule started forward with a reluctant plod. They rode in silence through Lawrence, past the general store where Evelyn used to buy penny candy as a child, past the schoolhouse where she'd learned to read. past the Patterson house where Daniel lived with his wife and baby. Every familiar landmark felt like a goodbye. At the edge of town, Jonas finally spoke. "It's about an hour's ride to the farm," he said. "The road gets rough in places. If you need to stop for any reason, just say so." Evelyn didn't answer. She kept her eyes fixed on the horizon, watching Lawrence disappear behind them. "I know this isn't what you wanted," Jonas continued. His voice was careful, measured. "I know your father. I know the circumstances aren't ideal." "Ideal?" The word burst out of her like a laugh. "Is that what we're calling it?" He was quiet for a moment. "No, I suppose not." "Why?" she demanded, turning to face him. "Why would you agree to this? Why would you pay $800, money you clearly don't have based on your clothes in this wagon, for a wife you've never met? What's wrong with you that you can't find a woman the normal way?" Jonas's hands tightened on the reins. "There's nothing wrong with me." "Then why?" He stared straight ahead at the dusty road. "Because I needed a wife, and you needed a way out. It seemed like a fair trade." "A fair trade?" Evelyn laughed bitterly. "I'm not a sack of flour or a plow blade. I'm a person." "I know that." "Do you? Because right now I feel like livestock, like something bought and paid for." Jonas pulled the wagon to a sudden stop. The mule snorted in protest. He turned to face her fully, and his gray eyes were intense, burning with something she couldn't name. "You want to know why I agreed to this?" he said, his voice low and fierce. "Because 8 months ago, my mother died. Cancer. I spent everything I had on doctors who couldn't help her and medicine that didn't work. I sat beside her bed for 3 months and watched her waste away to nothing, and when she finally went, I buried her in the plot next to my father and realized I was completely alone in the world. 26 years old, and I have nobody. No parents, no siblings, no wife, no children. Just me and 200 acres of land that's slowly killing me because I can't work it all by myself." He looked away, his jaw working. "So when your father came to me, desperate and broken, offering his daughter in exchange for debt payment, I saw an opportunity, not to buy a person, but to offer us both a chance at something better than what we had. You get a home and a husband who won't hurt you. I get a partner to help build a life. Is it romantic? No. Is it what either of us dreamed of? No. But it's honest, and it's more than most people get." Evelyn stared at him, stunned into silence. Jonas clicked to the mule, and they started moving again. "I'm not a good man," he said quietly. "I'm not educated or charming or wealthy, but I'm not cruel, and I keep my promises. That's all I can offer you." They rode in silence for a long time after that, the wagon creaking and swaying over the rutted dirt road. The Kansas prairie stretched endlessly in every direction, rolling hills of tall grass that rippled in the wind like an ocean. The sky was impossibly vast, bright blue and cloudless, and Evelyn felt suddenly terrifyingly small. "What's your farm like?" she finally asked. Jonas seemed surprised by the question. "Small. The house needs work. The roof leaks when it rains hard, and one of the window shutters is broken. But it's sturdy enough. There's a well with good water and a root cellar that stays cool even in summer. The land is decent for crops, though the soil's played out in some places from the previous owner working it too hard." "Do you have animals?" "One milk cow, some chickens. The mule." He paused. "I had 2 horses, but I sold them to help pay for my mother's care." "So you really did spend everything?" "Everything," he confirmed, "including borrowing against future crops. Your father's debt payment will help me keep the bank from taking the land." So that was it. He'd bought her to save his farm. "I'm sorry about your mother," Evelyn said quietly. Jonas's shoulders tensed. "Thank you." "What was she like?" He was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Kind. She was the kindest person I've ever known. When my father died in a farming accident, I was 12. She could have given up, could have sold the land and moved back east to live with her sister. But she stayed. She taught me everything about running a farm, about surviving out here. She used to say that the prairie doesn't care about your dreams or your plans. It only cares if you're strong enough to endure." "She sounds remarkable." She was. His voice roughened. She would have liked you. Evelyn didn't know what to say to that. The sun climbed higher as they traveled, and the day grew warm. Sweat beaded on Evelyn's forehead, and she wished she'd brought a bonnet. Her dress felt too heavy, too constricting. Everything felt wrong. Finally, Jonas pointed ahead. There. That's the farm. Evelyn looked, and her heart sank. The Reed farm sat in a shallow valley between two rises of prairie grass. The house was small, barely more than a cabin, really, with weathered wood siding and a roof that sagged slightly in the middle. The barn was in better condition but still looked tired, its red paint faded to pink. A fence ran around what appeared to be a vegetable garden, though from this distance it was hard to tell what was planted and what was weeds. It was the saddest, loneliest place Evelyn had ever seen. It's not much, Jonas said, and she heard defensive embarrassment in his voice. But it's home. They descended the gentle slope, and as they drew closer, Evelyn could see more details. Laundry hung on a line between two posts, men's shirts and trousers, threadbare but clean. Someone had planted wildflowers near the front door, though they looked like they were losing the battle against the relentless sun. The window shutters were indeed broken, one hanging at an angle. Jonas pulled the wagon to a stop beside the house and jumped down. He came around to Evelyn's side and offered his hand to help her down. His touch was gentle, careful. "Welcome home," he said, and the word felt like a stone in her chest. Home. This was supposed to be home now. The front door stood slightly ajar. Jonas pushed it open and stepped back to let her enter first. The interior was dim and sparse. One main room served as kitchen, dining area, and living space. A cast-iron stove sat against one wall, its pipe disappearing through the ceiling. A rough wooden table with two chairs occupied the center of the room. A few shelves held basic dishes and supplies. In one corner stood a rocking chair, old, worn, but beautifully made. "That was my mother's," Jonas said, nodding toward the chair. "Her father made it for her when she married." Through an open doorway, Evelyn could see into the second room, a bedroom with a simple bed frame, a mattress, and a trunk at the foot of the bed. No decorations, no curtains, nothing soft or comfortable. This was her prison now. 2 rooms and a broken shutter. "I know it's not what you're used to," Jonas said. He stood in the doorway, backlit by the sun, his expression unreadable. "But we can make improvements over time. Once the crops come in, where will I sleep?" The question came out harsher than she intended. Jonas blinked. "In the bedroom. In the bed. And where will you sleep?" He looked at her for a long moment, understanding dawning in his eyes. "In the barn, or out here in the chair if it rains." Evelyn stared at him. "But we're married." "Yes. Married people share a bed. Eventually, perhaps." Jonas crossed his arms, his expression softening. "But not tonight. Not until you're ready. Not until you actually want to. That might never happen. Then it never happens." She couldn't comprehend what she was hearing. "You paid $800 for a wife, and you're willing to sleep in a barn indefinitely?" "I paid $800 to settle your father's debt and to offer you a home where you're safe," Jonas corrected. "What happens between us beyond that is your choice. Always your choice." Tears burned in Evelyn's eyes. She didn't know if they were from relief or confusion or the sheer overwhelming wrongness of everything. "Why are you being kind to me?" she whispered. Jonas smiled, a small, sad smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Because someone should be. You've been through enough today." He picked up the canvas bag he'd brought from the wagon and set it gently on the table. "There's bread in here, and some cheese. Apples from the neighbor's tree. I'll milk the cow and check on the chickens. You take your time settling in. Rest if you need to." He started toward the door, then paused. "Evelyn?" She looked up. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "I'm sorry too. Sorry for the circumstances. Sorry that this is how things had to happen. But I'm going to do my best to make this bearable for you. That's a promise." Then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. Evelyn stood alone in the dim room, surrounded by the possessions of a dead woman and a stranger who was now her husband, and finally let herself cry. She didn't know how long she cried. long enough that her eyes burned and her throat ached, long enough that the shadows in the room shifted as the sun moved across the sky. When the tears finally stopped, she felt hollowed out, empty. She washed her face with water from a bucket by the door, cold well water that shocked her skin and cleared her head. Then she explored the small house properly, trying to make sense of her new reality. The main room was cleaner than she'd expected. The floor was swept, the dishes were washed, the stove was free of ash. Jonas clearly kept house reasonably well, though there were touches everywhere that revealed a man living alone. Mismatched cups, a coat hung on a chair instead of a hook, a candle burned down to a nub. In the bedroom, she found more evidence of his mother. A photograph on the wall showed a woman with kind eyes and Jonas's same strong jaw. A quilt on the bed, beautifully stitched with a pattern of stars. A hairbrush on the trunk, still with a few long gray hairs caught in its bristles. Evelyn ran her fingers over the quilt, feeling the craftsmanship, the care in every stitch. This woman had made beautiful things despite the hardness of prairie life, despite being alone after her husband died, despite everything. Maybe survival wasn't just enduring. Maybe it was also finding ways to create beauty in small spaces. The trunk at the foot of the bed was unlocked. Evelyn hesitated, feeling like an intruder, then opened it carefully. Inside were women's clothes, simple dresses, a winter coat, undergarments neatly folded. His mother's belongings, preserved like a shrine. But underneath, wrapped in paper, she found something else. A stack of letters tied with string and a leather journal. She knew she shouldn't read them. They were private, intimate, but she was desperate to understand the man she'd married, this stranger who'd bought her freedom and promised her safety. The journal entries were short, written in a careful, unpracticed hand. March 3rd. Father's been gone 2 years now. Mother says we're managing, but I see how thin she's gotten. The work is too much for the two of us. I'm thinking about selling the East 40 acres, but Mother won't hear of it. Says Father would want us to keep the land together. June 12th. Crops are coming in better this year. Thank God. Mother's cough is worse, though. She tries to hide it, but I hear her at night. September 29th. Dr. Harrison says it's consumption. 6 months, maybe a year. I don't believe him. I won't believe him. November 4th. Sold both horses today. Used the money for medicine from the specialist in Kansas City. Mother cried. Not from pain, but because she knows why I did it. January 15th. She's gone. I buried her next to Father this morning in the rain. The Reverend said she's in a better place now, but I don't know if I believe that either. How can anywhere be better than here, with the land she loved and the son who loved her? January 20th. Alone now. Completely alone. The silence in this house is deafening. The last entry was dated 2 months ago, March 8th. Thomas Cross came to see me today with a proposition. His daughter for his debt. I should have said no. A marriage of convenience is no foundation for happiness. But I looked around this empty house, at my mother's rocking chair, and her garden gone to weeds, and I thought maybe it's better to share loneliness than to drown in it alone. God forgive me. Evelyn closed the journal carefully, her hands shaking. He was just as trapped as she was, just as desperate. He'd lost everything too. His father, his mother, his future, his choices. The only difference was that he'd had longer to learn how to survive in the emptiness. She heard footsteps outside and quickly returned the journal to the trunk. Jonas entered carrying a bucket of milk in one hand and a basket of eggs in the other. He paused when he saw her standing by the trunk, but didn't comment. I thought we might have eggs for supper, he said. And there's cornbread left from yesterday. It's not fancy, but it's filling. I can cook, Evelyn heard herself say. If you'd like. He looked surprised. You don't have to. I want to. And she realized she meant it. She needed something to do, something to make her feel less like a prisoner and more like a person with purpose. Show me where everything is, and I'll make supper. So Jonas showed her. He showed her where he kept the flour and salt, where the oil was stored, how to work the cantankerous stove that burned too hot on the right side and too cool on the left. He spoke with the careful patience of someone teaching a valuable skill, never condescending, always respectful. Evelyn made scrambled eggs and fried the cornbread in a skillet with a little oil until it was golden and crispy on the edges. It was simple food, humble food, but it filled the house with warmth and the first almost comfortable feeling of the day. They ate at the small table as the sun set outside, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. Jonas ate with the focused intensity of a man who worked hard and needed fuel. Between bites, he told her about the farm, about the crops he'd planted, corn, wheat, some vegetables, about the cow who was stubborn but produced good milk, about the chickens who refused to stay in their coop and were always getting into the garden. "You talk about them like they're people," Evelyn observed. Jonas smiled slightly. "When you're alone as much as I've been, animals become your companions. I've had full conversations with that cow about crop rotation and weather patterns. And what does she think about crop rotation? She's against it. Very conservative in her views." It was such an unexpected joke that Evelyn laughed, actually laughed, for the first time all day. The sound surprised them both. "You should do that more," Jonas said quietly. "Do what?" "Laugh, it suits you." Evelyn looked down at her plate, suddenly shy. "There hasn't been much to laugh about lately." "No, I suppose not." They finished eating in silence, but it was a different kind of silence now. Less hostile, less frightened. After supper, Jonas washed the dishes while Evelyn dried them with a cloth that had seen better days. Their hands touched briefly as he passed her a plate, and she didn't pull away. "You're good at this," she said. "At washing dishes?" "At making things feel normal, less terrible than they could be." Jonas paused, his hands in the soapy water. "I meant what I said at the church, Evelyn. You don't have to be afraid here. I won't force anything, won't demand anything. We can just exist side by side until we figure out what this is supposed to be. And if we never figure it out, then we never figure it out. But at least we won't be alone." Evelyn thought about that journal entry. Better to share loneliness than to drown in it alone. "You take the bed," Jonas said when the last dish was dried and put away. "I'll be comfortable in the barn. There's hay up in the loft that makes a decent enough sleeping spot." "Jonas, please." His voice was gentle but firm. "Let me do this one thing right. Let me give you space to breathe." She didn't argue. She was too exhausted, physically and emotionally, to argue. The bed was more comfortable than she'd expected. The mattress was filled with corn husks that rustled when she moved, but his mother's quilt was soft and smelled faintly of lavender. Evelyn lay in the darkness, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the prairie night. Wind in the grass, an owl calling somewhere distant, the settling of old wood. Through the window, she could see a light in the barn, Jonas's lantern, burning gold in the darkness. What kind of man sleeps in a barn on his wedding night so his wife can feel safe? Evelyn pulled the quilt up to her chin and closed her eyes, too overwhelmed to process everything, too confused to know what she felt. But for the first time since her father had delivered the news that morning, she didn't feel like she was drowning. She felt like maybe, just maybe, she might survive this after all. Evelyn woke to the sound of a rooster crowing and sunlight streaming through the broken shutter, cutting across the bedroom floor in bright golden bars. For a disorienting moment, she didn't know where she was. Then memory crashed over her like cold water. The church, the vows, the wagon ride, this strange, sparse house that was supposed to be home now. She sat up slowly, her body stiff from tension and restless sleep. The quilt had twisted around her legs during the night, and she could hear her own heartbeat loud in the morning quiet. Through the window, she saw Jonas already up and working in the distance, a dark figure against the endless prairie sky, moving along the fence line with steady purpose. He hadn't come inside. He'd kept his promise. Evelyn dressed quickly in the same blue dress from yesterday, her only dress, she realized with a sinking feeling. Everything else she owned was back in Lawrence, in that boarding house room, and she had no idea if her parents would send her things, or if they'd already sold them to pay more debts. She braided her hair with fumbling fingers, splashed water on her face from the basin Jonas had left filled for her, and stepped out into the main room. The house was empty, but not abandoned. Someone, Jonas obviously, had laid a fire in the stove before he left. A pot of coffee sat warming on the stovetop, and beside it on the table was a plate covered with a cloth. Evelyn lifted the corner and found 2 biscuits, still slightly warm, with a pat of butter and a small jar of honey. A piece of paper lay beside the plate, folded once. She opened it to find a note written in that same careful, unpracticed handwriting she'd seen in the journal. "Good morning. Help yourself to breakfast. There's fresh milk in the pail by the door if you want some. I'm checking the fence in the north pasture. One of the posts came loose in last week's wind. Should be back by midday. Make yourself at home." Jonas. Make yourself at home. As if that were possible in a stranger's house wearing a dead woman's quilt and eating food prepared by a man she'd known for less than 24 hours. But Evelyn was hungry, and the biscuits were good, better than she'd expected, light and flaky, despite being made with what must have been limited supplies. She ate slowly, drinking the strong black coffee and watching dust motes drift through the sunlight. The silence in the house was different from the silence in her parents' boarding house room. That silence had been heavy with shame and desperation. This silence felt almost peaceful, broken only by the ticking of a clock she hadn't noticed last night and the distant sound of chickens clucking somewhere outside. After breakfast, Eveline washed her plate and cup in the bucket of water by the door, then stood uncertainly in the middle of the room. What was she supposed to do now? What did farm wives do all day? She'd grown up in town, in a house with a hired girl who did most of the heavy work. Her mother had taught her needlework and basic cooking, how to manage household accounts and receive visitors properly, but nothing about surviving on a hardscrabble farm where every resource was precious and nothing was wasted. Her eyes fell on the broken shutter, hanging crooked on its hinges. Jonas had mentioned it yesterday. Maybe she could fix it, or at least try. It would give her something to do besides sit and think about how completely her life had changed. She went outside into the bright morning. The sun was already warm on her face, and the wind carried the smell of grass and earth and something sweet she couldn't identify. The farm looked different in daylight, still shabby and worn, but less desolate somehow. The chickens were indeed out of their coop, pecking at the ground near the vegetable garden. The milk cow stood in the small pasture, watching Evelyn with large, patient brown eyes. The broken shutter proved more complicated than she'd hoped. One of the hinges had pulled completely free from the wood, leaving ragged holes. She'd need tools to fix it properly, and she had no idea where Jonas kept his tools, or if she was even allowed to use them. "You must be the new Mrs. Reed." Evelyn spun around, her heart jumping. A woman stood at the fence line, middle-aged, sturdy, with graying hair pulled back in a practical bun and a face weathered by sun and wind. She carried a covered basket and wore a faded calico dress that had been mended in several places. "I'm Martha Henley," the woman continued, opening the gate and walking through without waiting for an invitation. "My husband Tom and I farm the place just east of here, about a mile down the road. Heard about your wedding yesterday. News travels fast out here. And thought I'd bring by some things to welcome you." She set the basket on the ground and looked Evelyn up and down with sharp, assessing eyes that missed nothing. Not the single dress, not the nervous way Evelyn twisted her hands together, not the faint traces of yesterday's tears still visible on her face. "You're younger than I expected," Martha said bluntly. "How old are you, girl?" 19. 19. Martha shook her head. "Lord have mercy, I was 16 when I married Tom, and I thought that was too young. Come here, let me look at you properly." Before Evelyn could protest, Martha had taken her chin in work-roughened fingers and turned her face toward the light, studying her with the same intensity she might examine a horse she was thinking about buying. "Pretty thing," Martha muttered. "Too pretty for your own good, I expect. Has Jonas been treating you well?" The question was sharp, demanding truth. Evelyn felt her face flush. "He's been kind." "Kind how, specifically?" "He gave me the bed. He slept in the barn." Martha's eyebrows rose. "Did he now? Well, that's something at least." She released Evelyn's chin and stepped back. "I'll be honest with you, girl. When I heard Jonas Reed had bought himself a wife to settle some gambler's debts, I was prepared to march over here and give him a piece of my mind. Seemed like a cruel thing to do to a young woman. But if he's giving you space and treating you decent, maybe he's more like his mother than his father." "You knew his mother? Sarah?" Everyone knew Sarah Reed. She was the best woman in this whole territory, helped birth half the babies, nursed the sick, never turned away anyone who needed a meal or a kind word. When she died last winter, we all felt it. Martha's expression softened. Jonas took it hard. He was devoted to that woman. worked himself half to death trying to save her, sold everything he had for doctors and medicine that couldn't help. Eveline thought about the journal entry. She's gone. I buried her next to Father this morning in the rain. I didn't know, she said quietly. No, I don't suppose you did. Martha picked up the basket again and thrust it toward Eveline. Here, I brought you some things. Bread, preserves, a few eggs, some beans, also some fabric scraps if you're handy with a needle. I figured you might need supplies, seeing as how Jonas has been living like a monk these past months, barely keeping himself fed, let alone stocking a proper kitchen. Eveline took the basket, overwhelmed by the unexpected kindness. Thank you. I don't know what to say. Don't say anything, just survive. Martha's voice turned fierce. Listen to me, girl. Life out here is hard. Harder than anything you've probably experienced growing up in town. The weather will try to kill you. Too hot in summer, too cold in winter. Tornadoes that can flatten everything you've built in seconds. The work never ends. You'll go to bed exhausted and wake up exhausted and wonder why you bother. And the loneliness... She paused, her eyes distant. The loneliness can break you if you let it. Then why stay? Eveline whispered. Martha's gaze sharpened, focusing back on her. Because this land gives you something you can't get anywhere else. Freedom. Out here, nobody cares who your parents were or what mistakes you've made. You're judged by what you build and how you survive. For women especially, that's rare as gold. She reached out and squeezed Eveline's shoulder. You didn't choose this life, but it's yours now. You can let it destroy you, or you can learn to thrive in spite of everything. Your choice. Before Eveline could respond, Martha was already heading back toward the gate. I'll come by again in a few days, see how you're settling in. And if Jonas gives you any trouble at all, you come find me. Tom and I don't tolerate men who mistreat women, even on their own land. Then she was gone, striding across the prairie grass with the confidence of someone who'd walked this land 1,000 times and would walk it 1,000 more. Eveline stood holding the basket, feeling simultaneously comforted and terrified. Martha's words echoed in her head. You can let it destroy you, or you can learn to thrive in spite of everything. She carried the basket inside and unpacked it slowly, setting each item on the shelf with careful hands. The bread was fresh, the preserves were strawberry, the beans were already dried and ready to cook. At the bottom of the basket, wrapped in paper, she found the fabric scraps Martha had mentioned, bits of cotton in various colors and patterns, probably left over from other sewing projects. Not enough to make a whole dress, but maybe enough to patch or trim one. The broken shutter caught her eye again. Maybe she couldn't fix it properly without tools, but she could at least clean up the splintered wood and make it look less neglected. She found a knife in the kitchen, not ideal but serviceable, and went back outside to work on the shutter. The wood was rough and weathered, full of splinters that caught at her fingers. She worked carefully, trimming away the worst of the damage, and lost herself in the simple physical task. It felt good to do something productive, something that left visible results. She was so focused that she didn't hear Jonas approach until his shadow fell across her work. You don't have to do that, he said. Eveline looked up, squinting against the sun. Jonas stood there covered in dust and sweat, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle. He held a coil of rope in one hand and looked tired, but not unkind. I wanted to, she said. I needed something to do. He studied the shutter, then nodded. You've got a steady hand. The trimming is clean. He set down the rope and moved closer, examining the broken hinge. I'll need to drill new holes for the mounting. Should be able to fix it this evening after the heat breaks. Martha Henley came by, Eveline said. She brought supplies. Jonas's expression shifted, surprise mixed with something that might have been relief. That was kind of her. Martha and Tom are good people. They helped my mother a lot toward the end. She told me. She said your mother was the best woman in the territory. She was. Jonas's voice went rough. He cleared his throat and changed the subject. I should wash up. Then I thought we might have lunch. There's salt pork and cornmeal. I can make Johnny cakes if you'd like. I can make them, Eveline offered, if you show me how. So Jonas showed her, standing close in the small kitchen while she mixed cornmeal and salt and water into a thick batter. His instructions were clear and patient, and when she poured the first cake onto the hot griddle and it immediately began to burn, he didn't criticize or take over. He just said, The stove runs hot on that side. Try moving it more to the left. The second cake came out better. The third was almost perfect. They ate standing up, the Johnny cake still warm and dripping with butter from Martha's supplies. Jonas ate quickly, clearly hungry from his morning work, and Evelyn found herself studying him when he wasn't looking. The way his hair fell across his forehead, the scar on his chin that she hadn't noticed before, the careful way he moved as if always aware of taking up too much space. "What happened to your chin?" she asked. Jonas touched the scar reflexively. "Kicked by a horse when I was 14. Thought I could break a wild mare on my own. She had other ideas." "Did you break her?" "Eventually, but she broke my pride first, which was probably necessary." He smiled slightly. "My mother said pride is what gets you killed on a farm. Caution keeps you alive." "Your mother said a lot of wise things, it seems." "She did." Jonas set down his plate. "Evelyn, I've been thinking. You're going to need more than one dress out here. The work is hard, and clothes wear out fast. I don't have money for store-bought fabric, but I could trade some eggs to Mrs. Patterson in town. She usually has material." Mrs. Patterson, Daniel Patterson's mother. The family of the man Evelyn had once imagined herself marrying. "I'd rather not," Evelyn said quietly. Jonas looked at her sharply. "Why not?" She couldn't tell him the truth, that Daniel Patterson had courted her for 6 months, made promises he never intended to keep, then married Catherine Morris 3 weeks after telling Evelyn she was the only girl he'd ever love. That seeing his mother, seeing pity or judgment in her eyes, would be unbearable. "I just don't want charity from town," she said instead. "Martha brought fabric scraps. Maybe I can make something from those." Jonas didn't push, but she could see questions in his eyes. "All right. If you change your mind, let me know." The afternoon stretched long and hot. Jonas returned to his work, checking on the growing corn, reinforcing the chicken coop that kept losing residents to foxes, hauling water from the well to the garden where young plants wilted in the heat. Evelyn watched him from the doorway, amazed by his stamina. He never stopped moving, never complained, just worked with steady determination under the merciless sun. She tried to help, carrying water in a smaller bucket, but Jonas gently took it from her hands. "You'll get heat stroke," he said. "It takes time to acclimate. Just stay inside during the hottest part of the day. But you're out here working. I'm used to it. You're not. Don't make yourself sick trying to prove something." It wasn't condescension, just practicality, but it still made Evelyn feel useless. Back in Lawrence, she'd been good at things: embroidery, watercolors, playing the piano at church socials. Out here, those skills meant nothing. She couldn't fix a fence or plow a field or do any of the 1,000 things that farm life required. Inside the house, she examined Martha's fabric scraps more carefully. Most were too small to be useful, but there were a few larger pieces, a length of faded blue cotton, some cream muslin, bits of calico, and cheerful prints. If she was clever about it, maybe she could piece together an apron at least, something to protect her one dress while she learned how to be useful. She found a sewing basket in the bedroom trunk, Sarah Reed's obviously, with needles and thread and scissors that were still sharp. The basket itself was beautiful, woven from sweetgrass with a pattern of flowers worked into the lid. Evelyn ran her fingers over it, feeling the craftsmanship, and wondered what Sarah Reed had thought about while making it. Had she been happy? Had she loved Jonas's father? Had she imagined her son would one day marry a stranger out of desperation? The front door opened and Jonas came in carrying the coil of rope and a wooden toolbox. "Heat's breaking," he said. "Good time to fix that shutter before dark." Evelyn set aside the sewing basket. "Can I help?" "If you want, I'll need someone to hold the shutter steady while I drill." They worked together as the afternoon light turned golden. Jonas was good with tools, precise and methodical, making each hole exactly where it needed to be. Evelyn held the shutter in place, her arms aching from the strain while he worked. At one point their hands touched on the wood, and neither of them pulled away immediately. "There," Jonas said finally, stepping back to examine his work. The shutter hung straight now, opening and closing smoothly. "That should hold. It looks good," Evelyn said. And it did. It made the house look just a little less neglected, a little more cared for. Jonas began gathering his tools. "I need to milk the cow and feed the chickens. Then I thought we might have supper." There's venison from a deer I shot last week. Not fancy, but it's good meat. I can cook it, Evelyn said, if you tell me how you like it. Something shifted in Jonas's expression. Surprise, maybe? Or gratitude? However you make it will be fine. I'm not particular. He headed toward the barn, and Evelyn went back inside to figure out how to cook venison over a temperamental stove. She found the meat wrapped in cloth in the root cellar, kept cool in the darkness below the house. It was already cut into steaks, and there were wild onions and some potatoes that were starting to sprout but still edible. She made a simple meal: pan-fried venison, boiled potatoes, onions cooked until they were soft and sweet. It wasn't fancy, but the house filled with good smells, and when Jonas came in carrying a pail of fresh milk, he stopped in the doorway and just breathed in. "Smells like home," he said quietly, "like when my mother used to cook." They ate at the small table as darkness fell outside. Jonas told her about his day: the fence post that had rotted through and needed replacing, the corn that was coming up strong, the fox tracks he'd seen near the chicken coop. Evelyn listened and asked questions, learning the rhythms of farm life through his words. "The corn should be ready to harvest in late summer," Jonas explained. "If we get good weather and no hail, I'll sell most of it in town, keep some for the animals and for our own use through winter. The money from the harvest has to last us all year. Pay property tax, buy supplies, set aside seed for next spring. It's always a balancing act. What happens if the harvest fails?" Jonas's jaw tightened. "Then we tighten our belts and pray the next year is better. Or we lose the farm." That's what happened to the Johnsons 2 years ago. 3 bad harvests in a row, and the bank took everything. Last I heard, they'd moved to Kansas City, Tom working in a factory. He hated it. But at least they were together. Were they? Jonas met her eyes. "Tom used to tell me that losing the farm was like losing a piece of his soul, that working in a factory, never seeing the sun, never feeling soil in his hands was worse than dying. His wife Sarah, different Sarah, she told my mother that Tom started drinking, couldn't hold a job, got mean. They ended up living in a boarding house, fighting all the time, with Tom talking constantly about the farm they'd lost. Sometimes keeping something means watching it slowly destroy you." Evelyn thought about her father, about gambling debts and borrowed time, about how trying to hold on to a life that was already gone had led them all to this moment. "Is that what you think will happen to us? Slow destruction?" "No." Jonas's voice was firm. "Because I'm not trying to hold on to something that's already lost. I'm trying to build something new. There's a difference." After supper, Evelyn washed the dishes while Jonas sat in his mother's rocking chair, working on a piece of harness that needed mending. The domesticity of it struck her, how they moved around each other in the small space, how the silence between them was becoming comfortable rather than strained. "Evelyn," Jonas said suddenly, "I want you to know something. Your father's debt, the $800. I borrowed most of that money. From the bank, from neighbors, from anyone who would lend to me. It'll take me years to pay it back, maybe 5 or 6 if the harvests are good." She turned to look at him, confused. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I want you to understand that I didn't buy you. I mortgaged my future for a chance at not being alone, for a chance at building something with someone instead of just surviving by myself. And I want you to know that if you decide you can't stay here, if you want to leave, I won't stop you, even though it would mean I'd lose everything, the farm, the land, any hope of paying back what I owe. Your freedom is more important than my comfort." Evelyn stood frozen, the dish towel dripping in her hands. "You'd let me destroy you?" "I'd let you save yourself." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. "I don't have anywhere to go," Evelyn whispered. "Even if I wanted to leave. My mother had a sister in St. Louis. I could write to her, ask if she'd take you in, or I could give you money for a train ticket east. Not much, but enough to get you started somewhere. You'd have options." "Why would you do that?" Jonas set aside the harness and looked at her directly. "Because you deserve to choose your own life, even if that life doesn't include me." Evelyn's eyes burned with tears she refused to let fall. This man, this stranger she'd been sold to like property, was offering her more respect and freedom than her own parents ever had. It was overwhelming and confusing and made something in her chest ache with a feeling she couldn't name. "I'm not leaving," she heard herself say. "You don't have to decide now." "I'm not leaving," she repeated, stronger this time. Not because I don't have options, but because I'm tired of running. Tired of being helpless. You're giving me a chance to build something, even if I don't know what that something is yet. I want to take that chance. Jonas studied her face for a long moment, searching for truth. Whatever he saw must have satisfied him because he nodded slowly. All right, then we build together. The night deepened outside, and eventually Jonas stood, stretching his back with a wince. I should let you rest. It's been a long day. Jonas? Evelyn's voice stopped him at the door. Thank you for the shutter, for supper, for everything, for treating me like a person instead of property. His smile was small and sad. You are a person, Evelyn. That's not something you should have to thank me for recognizing. He left through the front door, heading toward the barn with his lantern casting long shadows across the yard. Evelyn watched him go, then prepared for bed in the small bedroom that was starting to feel less like a prison and more like a refuge. She lay under Sarah Reed's star quilt, listening to the prairie night, wind and crickets and the distant cry of a coyote. Through the window, she could see Jonas's lantern light in the barn, steady and golden. She thought about what Martha had said. The loneliness can break you if you let it. But maybe loneliness was easier to bear when you shared it with someone who understood. For the second night in this strange new life, Evelyn closed her eyes and let sleep take her, and for the second night she didn't feel like she was drowning. She woke sometime in the darkness to the sound of rain drumming on the roof. Not a gentle spring rain, but a fierce prairie storm, the kind that turned dust to mud and made the whole world feel like it was being washed away. Thunder rolled overhead, shaking the small house, and lightning flashed bright enough to turn night into day for split seconds at a time. Evelyn sat up, disoriented, her heart racing. The roof over her head held firm, but she could hear water dripping somewhere. The leak Jonas had mentioned. In the main room, probably. She pulled on her dress over her nightgown and ventured out of the bedroom. Sure enough, water dripped steadily from a spot in the roof near the corner, pooling on the wooden floor. She found a pot and set it underneath to catch the drips, the metallic ping-ping-ping of water hitting metal, almost lost in the thunder. Another flash of lightning, and through the window she saw the barn, dark now. Jonas's lantern had gone out. Was he all right out there? Was the barn roof holding? Did he have enough blankets to stay warm? Before she could talk herself out of it, Evelyn grabbed a shawl from the peg by the door and ran out into the storm. The rain soaked her instantly, cold and shocking. The yard had turned to thick mud that sucked at her boots with every step. Lightning illuminated her path in brilliant flashes, and thunder crashed so loud it felt like the world was splitting open. She reached the barn and wrestled the door open against the wind. Inside was darkness and the smell of hay and animals. The cow lowed nervously in her stall. "Jonas?" Evelyn called. No answer. Another lightning flash and she saw him, or rather, saw the ladder leading to the hayloft. She climbed carefully, her wet hands slipping on the rungs, and emerged into the loft where Jonas had made a rough bed in the hay. He was awake, sitting with his back against a post, and he startled when he saw her. "Evelyn, what are you doing out here?" "I wanted to make sure you were all right. The barn's weathered worse than this." He stood quickly, grabbing a blanket and wrapping it around her shoulders. "You're soaked through. You'll catch your death. So will you. Come inside. Sleep in the house tonight. The roof leaks, but at least it's dry." "I'm fine out here." "You're not fine. You're being stubborn." Evelyn's teeth were starting to chatter from cold. "Please, Jonas, I can't sleep knowing you're out here in this." He looked at her for a long moment, water dripping from his own hair, his eyes unreadable in the darkness between lightning flashes. Finally, he nodded. "All right, just for tonight." They ran back to the house together through the storm, stumbling in the mud, laughing breathlessly at the absurdity of it all. Inside, they were both dripping, leaving puddles on the floor. "I'll get more blankets," Evelyn said. "You can sleep in the chair by the stove. It'll be warmer than the barn at least." She brought him Sarah's quilts, all of them, and he settled into the rocking chair with a sigh of relief he tried to hide. Evelyn went back to the bedroom, but left the door open, somehow comforted by knowing he was just in the other room, that they were sharing this small space while the storm raged outside. "Evelyn?" Jonas's voice came through the darkness. "Yes? Thank you for coming to check on me. You didn't have to do that. I wanted to. Silence filled with the sound of rain and dripping and thunder rolling away toward the east. Good night, Jonas. Good night, Evelyn. And somehow, despite everything, despite the storm and the strangeness and the uncertain future stretching before them, Evelyn felt something shift inside her chest. Not love. Not yet. Maybe never. But something softer than fear. Something that might, with time and care, grow into something worth keeping. She pulled the quilt up to her chin and listened to Jonas's breathing from the other room, steady and calm, and let it lull her back to sleep while the prairie storm washed the world clean outside their small, imperfect home. The morning after the storm dawned clear and impossibly bright, as if the world had been scrubbed clean and hung out to dry. Evelyn woke to find Jonas already gone from the rocking chair, the quilts folded neatly and stacked on the seat. Through the window, she could see him working in the mud-soaked yard, assessing damage from the night's violence. She dressed quickly and went outside to find him standing by the vegetable garden, his expression grim. The storm had flattened half the young plants and washed deep gullies through the carefully tended rows. Water still stood in puddles everywhere, reflecting the bright sky like scattered mirrors. "How bad is it?" Evelyn asked. Jonas rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture she was learning meant he was worried but trying not to show it. "Could be worse. The corn made it through mostly intact. It's tall enough now to weather a storm. But the garden took a beating. I'll need to replant the beans and probably the squash. And the chicken coop lost part of its roof. I found 2 hens drowned in the yard this morning. I'm sorry. It's the prairie. You learn to expect loss." He turned to look at her, and something in his expression softened. "Thank you for last night, for making me come inside. I would have been miserable out there." "You were already miserable out there. I just gave you permission to stop being stubborn about it." A smile flickered across his face, genuine and warm. "My mother used to say the same thing, that I'd cut off my own nose to spite my face if I thought it was the right thing to do." They worked together through the morning, salvaging what they could from the garden. Jonas showed Evelyn how to gently lift the flattened plants and stake them upright, how to tell which ones might recover and which were too damaged to save. Her hands grew caked with mud, her dress became filthy, but she found herself oddly content with the work. There was something satisfying about helping things grow, about coaxing life back into damaged earth. "You're a fast learner," Jonas observed, watching her carefully replant a row of beans. "Most town girls would refuse to get their hands dirty like this." "Most town girls weren't sold to pay their father's gambling debts," Evelyn replied, then immediately regretted the bitterness in her voice. "I'm sorry, that was true," Jonas finished quietly. "It was true, and you have every right to be angry about it." "Are you? Angry, I mean, about being forced into this arrangement?" Jonas sat back on his heels, considering the question. "I don't know if forced is the right word. Nobody held a gun to my head. I chose this, even if the circumstances that led to the choice weren't ideal." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "But am I angry that I'm so alone and desperate that buying a wife seemed like my best option?" "Yes. Yes, I'm angry about that. I'm angry that my mother died. I'm angry that this farm takes everything I have and still demands more. I'm angry that I'm 26 years old and feel 50. The honesty in his words caught Evelyn off guard. She'd expected platitudes or deflection, not this raw admission of pain and frustration. "What do you do with the anger?" she asked. "I put it into the work. I dig it into the ground with every seed I plant. I hammer it into every fence post I drive." He looked at her directly. "What do you do with yours?" Evelyn thought about it, about the rage that had burned in her chest when her father told her what he'd done, about the helpless fury of standing at that altar beside a stranger, about the 1,000 small indignities that had brought her to this moment. "I don't know yet," she admitted. "I'm still learning how to live with it. Then we'll figure it out together." The simple promise settled something inside her, some sharp edge that had been cutting at her since the wedding. They returned to their work in companionable silence, and when Martha Henley appeared at the fence line an hour later, she found them both covered in mud and laughing over a chicken that kept escaping their attempts to herd it back toward the damaged coop. "Well now," Martha called out, her hands on her hips. "This is a sight. Jonas Reed laughing. Didn't think I'd live to see that again." Jonas straightened, trying and failing to brush mud off his pants. "Mrs. Henley, didn't expect you back so soon. Came to check on you both after the storm. Looks like you weathered it well enough, though I see you lost some hens." Martha's sharp eyes moved between Jonas and Evelyn, taking in their muddy clothes and easy posture with each other. "And I see you two are settling in just fine. Mrs. Henley brought me supplies when I first arrived," Evelyn explained to Jonas. "She's been very kind." "Martha, please, we don't stand on ceremony out here." The older woman walked through the gate, her boots squelching in the mud. "I actually came with a purpose beyond nosiness, though I won't lie and say I'm not curious how you're managing. There's a barn raising at the Morrison place next Saturday. Lightning struck their barn during a storm last month, burned it right to the ground. Whole community's coming together to build them a new one." Jonas's expression shifted, surprise mixed with something that looked like longing. "I didn't know. Nobody told me." "That's because you've been keeping to yourself something fierce these past months," Martha said gently. "I know losing Sarah was hard, Jonas. We all understand that, but you can't isolate yourself forever. This community took care of your mother when she was sick. Now it's time to let them take care of you and your new wife." "I don't need—" "It's not about need, boy. It's about belonging." Martha turned to Evelyn. "A barn raising is when all the men come together to build, and all the women bring food and help each other with the work that needs doing. It's a chance for Evelyn here to meet the other farm wives, make some friends, learn how things are done out here. Unless you're planning to keep her locked up like Rapunzel in that sad little house of yours." Jonas flushed. "Of course not. Evelyn can go if she wants to." "I want to," Evelyn said quickly. The thought of meeting other women, of having conversations that weren't about crops and chickens and loss, was suddenly desperately appealing. "If it's appropriate for me to attend." "Appropriate? Girl, you're married now. You're a farm wife. Of course it's appropriate." Martha's expression softened. "Besides, you'll need friends out here. The prairie's too big and too lonely to face without them." After Martha left with promises to come collect them on Saturday morning, Jonas and Evelyn returned to their repairs. But something had shifted in the air between them. A new awareness, perhaps, that their private struggle to build a life together was about to become public, that the community would see them, judge them, form opinions about this strange marriage of convenience and whether it could possibly work. "Are you nervous?" Jonas asked as they worked on patching the chicken coop roof with spare boards. "About Saturday?" "Terrified," Evelyn admitted. "Everyone will know why we married. They'll all be watching us, whispering about us." "Let them whisper. What matters is what we know, not what they think they know." "And what do we know?" Jonas hammered in a nail with precise force before answering. "We know we're both trying our best. That's more than most marriages can say." The week that followed established a rhythm that began to feel almost normal. Jonas rose before dawn each day to milk the cow and feed the animals. Evelyn learned to make coffee strong enough to wake the dead and biscuits that didn't burn more often than they did. They worked together in the garden, replanting what the storm had destroyed, and Jonas taught her the difference between weeds and useful plants, between soil that would nurture growth and soil that would strangle it. In the evenings, after supper, they sat together in the main room, Jonas repairing tools or mending harnesses, Evelyn sewing with Sarah Reed's basket and Martha's fabric scraps. She was making an apron, piecing together the scraps in a pattern that reminded her of the star quilt. It was slow work, but satisfying. Creating something useful from remnants felt appropriate somehow, given the circumstances of her new life. Sometimes they talked. Jonas told her about the farm, about his parents and their early struggles, about the year a tornado had taken the original barn, and how his father had rebuilt it with his own hands in the middle of winter. Evelyn told him about growing up in Lawrence, about the boarding house, and the slow decline of her family's fortunes, though she still couldn't bring herself to mention Daniel Patterson or the humiliation of being abandoned for a richer girl. Sometimes they didn't talk at all, and the silence was comfortable rather than awkward. Evelyn found herself watching Jonas when he wasn't looking, the concentration on his face as he worked, the careful way he handled his mother's things, the unconscious grace of someone who'd spent his whole life doing physical labor. He was handsome, she realized with some surprise. not in the polished, citified way that Daniel had been handsome, but in a rougher, more honest way, like something carved from the prairie itself. On Friday night, Jonas came in from evening chores carrying something wrapped in paper. "I went into town today," he said. "Traded eggs with Mrs. Patterson, like I mentioned." Evelyn's stomach clenched at the name. I told you I didn't want—" "I know, but you need more than one dress. And I couldn't stand seeing you wear the same thing every day, like you didn't deserve better." He set the package on the table. "I didn't tell her it was for you specifically, just said I needed fabric. She didn't ask questions." Evelyn unwrapped the paper slowly. Inside was a length of cotton in a soft green color, like new grass in spring. Enough for a whole dress, and of better quality than the faded blue one she'd been married in. Along with it was thread in matching color and a card of buttons made from real shell. "Jonas, this must have cost—" "It cost eggs, that's all. And before you argue, remember that you've been working just as hard as I have this week. You've earned new clothes." Evelyn ran her fingers over the fabric, her eyes stinging with tears she was too proud to let fall. When was the last time someone had given her something just because they thought she deserved it? Not as payment, not out of obligation, but simply as kindness? "Thank you," she whispered. "I'll start on it tomorrow after we get back from the barn raising. Or you could start on it tonight. I don't mind the quiet while I work." So Evelyn laid out the fabric on the table and began planning her pattern, measuring twice and cutting carefully, while Jonas sat in the rocking chair and worked on a bridle that needed new leather. The lamp burned golden between them, and outside the spring night was full of cricket song and the wind moving through the grass like breathing. "Evelyn," Jonas said suddenly, "can I ask you something personal?" She looked up from her cutting. "You can ask. I might not answer." "Fair enough." He set aside the bridle. "Was there someone, back in Lawrence, someone you cared about?" Evelyn's hand stilled on the fabric. "Why do you ask?" "Because when I mentioned Mrs. Patterson, you looked like I'd struck you. And I've noticed you don't like talking about town or the people there. I thought maybe—" He trailed off, leaving the question unfinished but hanging in the air between them. She could lie, could tell him it was nothing, just general unpleasant memories of a difficult time. But something in his expression, the careful neutrality, the fear of causing pain, made her want to be honest. "There was someone," she admitted quietly. "Daniel Patterson. He courted me for 6 months, said he loved me. Then he married Catherine Morris 3 weeks after telling me I was the only girl for him. Her father owns the bank. My father owed him money." Jonas's jaw tightened. "I see. Do you? Do you see how it felt to realize I wasn't worth choosing when someone richer was available? To know that my value was measured entirely in what I could provide?" The words came out harder than she intended, sharp with old hurt. "At least with you, there's honesty. You needed a wife, I needed a home. It's transactional, but it's not a lie. Daniel lied. He made me believe I was loved when really I was just convenient until something better came along." "I'm sorry," Jonas said. "That's a cruel thing to do to anyone." "Yes, well, I've learned that cruelty often wears a kind face." Evelyn picked up the scissors again, her hands shaking slightly. "That's why I didn't want fabric from his mother. I couldn't bear the thought of her knowing, of her pitying me or worse, thinking I got what I deserved for aiming above my station." Jonas stood and crossed to the table, standing close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "Daniel Patterson is a fool. And any man who would treat you as convenient rather than precious doesn't deserve a moment of your time or thought." Evelyn looked up at him, surprised by the fierce protectiveness in his voice. His eyes held hers, storm gray and intense, and for a moment she forgot to breathe. "You don't know me well enough to say that," she whispered. "I know enough. I know you came out into a storm to check on me. I know you work until your hands bleed without complaint. I know you're trying to make the best of a situation you never asked for, with grace and strength that humbles me." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "So yes, I do know enough, and Daniel Patterson is still a fool." The touch was gentle, barely there, but it sent warmth spreading through Evelyn's chest like sunrise. She wanted to lean into it, to close the distance between them, to find out if this strange marriage could become something real and chosen. But fear held her back, fear of being hurt again, fear of wanting something she might not be allowed to keep. Jonas seemed to understand. He stepped back, giving her space. "I'll let you work on your dress. I'm going to check on the animals one more time before bed." He left quietly, and Evelyn stood alone in the lamplight, her heart racing and her mind spinning with confusion and possibility and the terrifying realization that she was starting to care for this man who'd bought her freedom with borrowed money and asked for nothing in return. Saturday morning arrived bright and clear, perfect weather for a barn raising. Martha and Tom Henley came by in their wagon just after breakfast, and Jonas helped Evelyn climb into the back where she could sit with Martha while the men drove up front. "You look nervous," Martha observed as they started down the road toward the Morrison place. "I am," Evelyn admitted. She wore her blue dress. She'd run out of time to finish the green one, but at least she'd cleaned and pressed it carefully. "I don't know anyone. I don't know what I'm supposed to do." "You're supposed to be yourself and help where help is needed, that's all." Martha patted her hand. "The women here aren't like town ladies with their social rules and judgments. We're too busy surviving to care about petty things. You'll see." The Morrison farm was larger than Jonas's place, with a house that had actual glass windows and a barn foundation already laid where the old structure had burned. By the time they arrived, dozens of wagons were already there, and the yard was full of people. Men organizing lumber and tools, women setting up tables for food, children running wild with the freedom of a community gathering. Jonas helped Evelyn down from the wagon, his hand steady under her elbow. "Stay with Martha," he said quietly. "She'll introduce you around. I'll be with the men if you need me." Then he was gone, swallowed up by the group of farmers gathering around the foundation, and Evelyn felt suddenly very alone despite being surrounded by people. "Come on," Martha said, linking her arm through Evelyn's. "Let's get you settled. The first person you need to meet is Helen Morrison. It's her barn we're raising." Helen Morrison turned out to be a woman in her 50s with flour in her hair and laugh lines around her eyes. She welcomed Evelyn warmly, thanking her for coming, and within minutes Evelyn found herself absorbed into the rhythm of women's work at a barn raising, setting out food, minding children, carrying water to the men who were already sweating in the morning sun. The other women were curious but kind, asking questions about where she'd come from and how she was settling in, but none with the malicious edge Evelyn had feared. They seemed genuinely interested in welcoming her into their community. "It's good to see Jonas with company," one woman named Sarah Cooper said as they sliced bread for sandwiches. "He's been so isolated since his mother passed. We worried about him." "He works very hard," Evelyn said carefully, not sure how much to reveal. "Too hard, probably," another woman added, this one introduced as Ruth Williams. "Jonas has always been that way. Even as a boy, he took everything so seriously. His mother used to say he carried the weight of the world on those shoulders." "She would be glad he has you now," Helen Morrison said gently. "Sarah Reed loved that boy more than life itself. She made us all promise to look after him if anything happened to her. But a wife can do what neighbors can't. Give him a reason to come home at the end of the day instead of working himself into an early grave." The words settled uncomfortably on Evelyn's shoulders. These women expected her to save Jonas somehow, to be the cure for his loneliness and grief, but she was barely keeping herself afloat. How could she possibly be someone's salvation when she was still trying to figure out how to survive? As if reading her thoughts, Martha appeared at her elbow. "Stop looking so terrified," she murmured. "They don't expect miracles. They just want Jonas to be happy. And from what I saw at your place, you're already doing more for him than he's had in a long time. Someone to talk to share the work with. That's enough." The morning passed in a blur of activity. The men worked with impressive coordination, raising the barn's frame piece by piece, while the women kept them fed and hydrated. Evelyn found herself watching Jonas as he worked, the way he moved with confidence and strength, the easy camaraderie he had with the other men, despite his months of isolation. She saw him laugh at something Tom Henley said, saw him patiently show a younger man how to properly secure a beam, and realized that this was who Jonas had been before grief and loneliness had carved away everything but survival. "He's different with you here," a voice said beside her. Evelyn turned to find a young woman about her own age, pretty with blonde hair and blue eyes. She looked vaguely familiar, though Evelyn couldn't place from where. I'm Catherine Patterson, the woman said, and Evelyn's stomach dropped. I know who you are. The whole county knows about Jonas Reed's sudden marriage. Of course. Catherine Morris, who had become Catherine Patterson, Daniel's wife. I should get back to work, Evelyn said, starting to turn away. Wait, please. Catherine reached out but didn't quite touch her. I'm not here to cause trouble. I just wanted to say. She paused, choosing her words carefully. I wanted to say I'm sorry for how things happened. With Daniel. Evelyn stared at her. You're sorry? I know what Daniel told you, what he promised you. Catherine's voice dropped lower. He told me too. He's very good at making promises he has no intention of keeping. I didn't know about you when I agreed to marry him. My father arranged it, said it would secure the family finances. If I'd known Daniel had been courting someone else, had made promises to someone else. Would it have changed anything? Evelyn asked quietly. Would you have refused? Catherine's silence was answer enough. That's what I thought. Evelyn started to walk away again. He's not a good husband, Catherine called after her, and there was something broken in her voice that made Evelyn stop. Daniel, he's not kind. He drinks too much and he has a temper and he still flirts with every woman who crosses his path. Some days I wish I'd had the courage to refuse my father, to choose poverty over this gilded cage. When I heard about you, that you'd married Jonas Reed, I was jealous, because at least you have a man who's decent. Evelyn turned slowly to face her. Catherine's eyes were bright with unshed tears, her carefully composed expression cracking to reveal the misery underneath. I'm sorry too, Evelyn said finally. For both of us. For all of us who don't get to choose our own lives. But you're choosing now, aren't you? Every day you stay with Jonas, you're choosing. Catherine wiped at her eyes. That's more than I can say. And for what it's worth, I think you chose better than I did, even if you didn't mean to. Before Evelyn could respond, Catherine hurried away, disappearing into the crowd of women. Evelyn stood frozen, trying to process the conversation, trying to reconcile the Catherine she'd imagined, triumphant, smug, everything Evelyn wasn't, with this sad woman trapped in her own gilded cage. You all right? Martha appeared at her side again, her sharp eyes missing nothing. I saw you talking to Catherine Patterson. She apologized, Evelyn said numbly, for stealing Daniel. Stealing? Is that what happened? Martha snorted. Girl, that's not stealing, that's inheriting a burden. Daniel Patterson is his father's son, charming on the surface, rotten underneath. His mother knows it, which is probably why she was so willing to sell fabric to Jonas. Felt guilty about her son's behavior, most like. How does everyone know all of this? Because we live in each other's pockets out here. Privacy is a luxury we can't afford. Martha steered Evelyn back toward the food tables. You can't keep secrets on the prairie, so we all know each other's business. The trick is learning not to judge, because we've all got our own struggles. Catherine Patterson is stuck with a husband who doesn't love her. You got stuck with a marriage you didn't choose, but at least your husband is good to you. That counts for more than you might think. By afternoon, the barn was taking shape, walls rising, roof beams in place. The men worked with the intensity of people racing daylight, and the women prepared the communal supper that would celebrate the day's work. Evelyn found herself peeling potatoes alongside women who shared stories of their own difficult beginnings, their own arranged marriages or hasty weddings, or compromises made in the name of survival. I married Tom after knowing him for 2 weeks, Martha said, attacking potatoes with vigorous efficiency. My parents had died of cholera, and I was 16 with no family and no prospects. Tom was 25 and needed a wife to help with his farm. We made a deal. I'd cook and clean and help with the work. He'd provide a home and never raise a hand to me. Been married 33 years now, and I can honestly say I love that stubborn man more than I ever thought possible. How did you go from a deal to love? Evelyn asked. Martha smiled. Time and proximity and choosing kindness even when we didn't feel kind. Love's not just a feeling, girl. It's a decision you make every single day. Some days it's easy. Some days it's the hardest thing you'll ever do. But if you keep choosing it, keep choosing each other, eventually the feeling catches up to the decision. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, the barn stood complete, a testament to what a community could build together. The men gathered around it, sweaty and exhausted and proud, while the women brought out the food. Long tables had been set up in the yard, and everyone filled their plates and found places to sit in the grass or on wagon beds, eating and laughing and sharing the satisfaction of work well done. Jonas found Eveline in the crowd and sat down beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "You did good today," he said quietly. "I saw you helping, talking to people. You fit in better than I thought you would." "Better than you thought, or better than you hoped?" Eveline teased gently. He smiled. "Both, maybe. I was worried you'd feel out of place, that you'd regret coming." "I don't regret it." And as she said it, Eveline realized it was true. Despite the awkwardness and Catherine Patterson's unexpected confession, despite feeling overwhelmed and out of her depth, she didn't regret being here, didn't regret being part of something larger than her own small struggles. These are good people. They are. They were good to my mother, and they've been good to me even when I didn't deserve it. Jonas looked out at the gathered community, his expression softening. I forgot what this felt like. Being part of something, not being alone. Eveline leaned into him slightly, a small gesture of comfort and connection. You're not alone anymore. He turned to look at her, his eyes searching hers in the fading light. Neither are you. The moment stretched between them, full of possibility and the tentative beginnings of something neither of them quite knew how to name. Around them, people laughed and ate and celebrated the day's work, but for Eveline and Jonas, the world had narrowed to just this. The two of them, shoulder to shoulder, choosing each other one small moment at a time. On the ride home, with darkness falling and the wagon swaying gently beneath them, Eveline found herself thinking about what Martha had said, about love being a decision, a choice made daily. She thought about Jonas sleeping in the barn to give her space, about him buying fabric with traded eggs, about the careful way he treated her as if she was something precious rather than purchased. Maybe that was what love could be in a marriage like theirs. Not lightning strikes and passionate declarations, but steady kindness and daily choosing. Not perfect, but real. Not what she dreamed of as a girl, but possibly better than dreams. More solid, more lasting, built on partnership rather than romance. When they arrived home, Jonas helped her down from the wagon with the same careful gentleness he always showed. "Thank you for today," he said, "for being willing to be seen with me. I know it wasn't easy." "It was easier than I expected," Eveline replied. "And Jonas, you don't have to sleep in the barn tonight." He went very still. "Eveline, I'm not saying you have to share the bed," she clarified quickly, feeling her face heat. "Just that you could sleep inside, on the floor if you want, or in the chair, just inside, where you're not alone." Jonas looked at her for a long moment, and in the moonlight, his eyes were soft. "All right, if you're sure." "I'm sure." That night, Jonas made a pallet on the floor beside the bed, using blankets and his coat for a pillow. It wasn't comfortable, Eveline was certain, but he didn't complain. They lay in the darkness, both acutely aware of the other's presence, and talked quietly about the day, about the barn raising and the people they'd met and the work still to be done on their own farm. "Eveline," Jonas said as sleep was beginning to pull at them both, "about what you told me, about Daniel Patterson." "What about it?" "I just want you to know that whatever you decide about us, about this marriage, I'll respect it. If you want this to just be a partnership, two people helping each other survive, that's all right. If you want more someday, that would be all right too. And if you decide you want to leave after all, go back to town or start over somewhere else, I'll find a way to make that happen even if it ruins me. Your choice, always, just like I promised." Eveline's throat tightened with emotion. "And what do you want, Jonas? You keep talking about my choices, but what about yours?" He was quiet for so long she thought he'd fallen asleep. Then, in a voice so low she almost missed it, he said, "I want whatever makes you happy, even if it's not me." The selflessness of it broke something open in Eveline's chest. She rolled onto her side, looking down at him in the darkness. "Jonas?" "Yes?" "I'm glad it's you. I'm glad it was you who walked into that church, you who brought me here. You who's been patient and kind when you had every right not to be. I don't know what this will become, but I'm glad it's with you." She could see the gleam of his eyes in the moonlight coming through the window, could see the way his throat worked as he swallowed hard. "I'm glad too," he whispered. "Gladder than I have words for." Evelyn settled back into the bed, but she let her hand drop over the edge, dangling down toward where Jonas lay. After a moment's hesitation, she felt his fingers brush against hers. The lightest touch, barely contact at all, but enough. Enough to say they were in this together. Enough to say that loneliness, at least, was something they didn't have to face anymore. Outside, the prairie night sang its usual songs, wind and crickets and the distant howl of coyotes. But inside the small house that was slowly becoming a home, two people who'd been strangers only days before fell asleep holding hands across the space between bed and floor, choosing each other in the smallest, most profound way possible. And in the morning, when sunlight streamed through the newly repaired shutter, they would wake and choose each other again. The weeks that followed the barn raising brought a subtle shift to the rhythm of their days, like a key turning in a lock that had been stuck for too long. Jonas still rose before dawn, still worked until his muscles screamed and his hands bled, but now he came home to a house where lamplight burned in the window and the smell of supper cooking greeted him at the door. Evelyn still felt the weight of her stolen future pressing on her shoulders, still woke some mornings with tears on her face from dreams of the life she'd lost, but now she had purpose beyond mere survival. She had someone who needed her, and somehow that made all the difference. Jonas no longer slept in the barn. He made his pallet on the floor each night, and Evelyn would lie in the bed above him, and they would talk in the darkness about everything and nothing until sleep claimed them both. Sometimes their hands found each other across the space between them. Sometimes they fell asleep with fingers intertwined, that small connection anchoring them both through the lonely prairie night. The green fabric became a dress, and then Evelyn made herself another from material Martha brought by along with news and gossip from neighboring farms. She learned to bake bread that didn't come out hard as stone, to churn butter until her arms ached, to recognize the difference between a hen that was laying well and one that was just eating feed without producing. The work was endless and exhausting, but it was also strangely satisfying. Each skill mastered was a small victory over the helplessness that had defined her old life. One morning in early June, Evelyn woke to find Jonas already dressed and standing by the window, his expression troubled. The quality of light was strange, greenish and heavy, the air so still it felt like the world was holding its breath. "What's wrong?" she asked, sitting up. "Storm coming. A bad one." Jonas's voice was tense. "The sky has that look to it. We need to prepare." Evelyn dressed quickly and followed him outside. The morning was unnaturally quiet. No birds singing, no wind moving through the grass, just an oppressive silence that made the hair on her arms stand up. The sky to the west was dark, almost black, with clouds that roiled and churned like a living thing. "What do we do?" Evelyn asked, fighting down the fear rising in her chest. "We secure everything we can and hope for the best." Jonas was already moving, his actions quick and efficient. "Get the chickens into the coop and latch it tight. I'll bring the cow into the barn and check that everything's tied down. If this turns into a tornado, we'll need to get to the root cellar." They worked frantically as the storm approached, moving with desperate urgency while the strange green light intensified and the first rumbles of thunder rolled across the prairie like cannon fire. Evelyn had never seen anything like it, the sheer scale of the storm, the way it seemed to swallow the sky whole. In town, storms had meant staying inside, maybe losing a few shingles. Out here on the open prairie, exposed and vulnerable, a storm meant potential devastation. The wind hit first, sudden and vicious, nearly knocking Evelyn off her feet as she ran from the chicken coop. Jonas caught her, steadying her with strong hands. "Inside!" he shouted over the rising howl. "Get inside, now!" They made it into the house just as the rain began. Not a gentle patter, but a violent assault, dropped so large and hard they stung like thrown pebbles. Jonas slammed the door shut and immediately began checking the windows, making sure they were latched tight. "Will the house hold?" Evelyn had to yell to be heard over the storm's fury. "It's held through worse, but if I tell you to get to the root cellar, you don't hesitate. You go immediately. Understand?" She nodded, her heart pounding. Through the window, she could see the world turning gray and terrible. The rain so thick it was like looking through a waterfall. Lightning flashed bright enough to hurt, and the thunder that followed was so loud it rattled dishes on the shelves. Jonas moved to stand beside her, his presence solid and reassuring. "I won't let anything happen to you," he said quietly, though whether he was making a promise to her or to himself, Evelyn couldn't tell. The storm raged for what felt like hours, but was probably less than one. The house shook and groaned but held firm, Sarah Reed's careful construction proving its worth. Water found the leak in the roof again, pouring in faster than the pot could catch it, but Jonas just pushed the furniture away from the stream and let it pool on the floor. Wood could be dried, lives couldn't be replaced. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the storm passed. The rain slowed to a drizzle, the wind died to a whisper, and weak sunlight broke through the thinning clouds. Jonas opened the door cautiously, and they stepped out into a world transformed. The vegetable garden was flattened again, worse than before. Half the fence around it had been torn away completely, the posts ripped from the ground and scattered across the yard like matchsticks. The chicken coop had lost most of its roof, again, and Evelyn could hear the panicked clucking of hens inside. But the house stood. The barn stood. They had survived. Jonas walked slowly through the wreckage, his expression carefully neutral, but Evelyn could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. This was more than just damage. This was money and time and resources they didn't have, repairs that would set them back weeks, maybe months. "How bad is it?" she asked, though she could see the answer in his face. "Bad. The garden's destroyed. That's our food for winter. The fence will need to be completely rebuilt. The chicken coop needs a new roof again, and I don't have enough lumber." He rubbed his face with both hands. "And I need to check the fields. If the corn took damage, if the wheat got flattened." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Evelyn understood what he wasn't saying. If the crops failed, they would lose everything. The farm, the land, any hope of paying back the money Jonas had borrowed. They would be destitute. "Tell me what to do," Evelyn said firmly. "Tell me how to help." Jonas looked at her, and something in his expression softened. "You're already helping, more than you know. But right now, I need to ride out and check the fields. It'll take most of the day. Can you handle things here? Check on the animals, see what can be salvaged from the garden?" "I can do that." He saddled the mule, they still only had the one, and rode out toward the fields, his back straight, but his shoulders carrying the weight of the world. Evelyn watched him go, then turned to face the wreckage of their small farm. The chickens were terrified but alive, huddled together in the destroyed coop. Evelyn managed to coax them out and into the barn, where they'd be safer until the coop could be repaired. The cow was agitated but unharmed, and Evelyn spent time calming her, stroking her neck and murmuring nonsense until the animal relaxed. The garden was worse than it had looked from a distance. Nearly everything was destroyed, the young plants torn from the ground, the soil washed away in deep gullies, weeks of careful work undone in an hour. Evelyn wanted to cry looking at it, wanted to sit down in the mud and give up, but crying wouldn't fix anything. Giving up wasn't an option. She salvaged what she could, a few plants that might recover with staking, some root vegetables that could be replanted. It wasn't much, but it was something. She worked until her back ached and her hands were raw, until the sun climbed high and hot overhead and sweat soaked through her dress. Martha appeared around midday, riding up on a wagon driven by her husband Tom. "We saw the storm pass over your place," Martha called out. "Came to see how bad it was." "Bad enough," Evelyn replied, straightening up and pushing sweat-damp hair from her face. "The garden's destroyed. The fence is gone. Jonas is checking the fields." Tom climbed down from the wagon and walked through the wreckage, assessing with a practiced eye. "Could be worse," he said finally. "House and barn are standing. Animals are alive. You can rebuild from this." "With what?" The words burst out of Evelyn before she could stop them. "We don't have money for lumber. We don't have time to replant everything before it's too late in the season. I don't know how we're supposed to rebuild from this." Martha climbed down and wrapped an arm around Evelyn's shoulders. "The same way everyone out here rebuilds, with help from your neighbors. Tom, go get the lumber we've got stored in our barn, the good pieces we were saving, And Evelyn, you and I are going to make a list of what needs doing, and then we're going to get it done. I can't ask you to. You're not asking, we're offering. That's what community means out here. Jonas helped Tom rebuild our shed last year after the wind took it. We helped the Morrisons with their barn. Now we help you. That's how it works. Nobody survives alone on the prairie. Tom rode off to fetch lumber, and Martha helped Evelyn assess the damage and make plans for repairs. They were working on salvaging fence posts when Jonas returned late in the afternoon, riding slowly, his face drawn with exhaustion and worry. He dismounted and stood looking at the farm, at Martha and Evelyn working together, at Tom's wagon now loaded with lumber sitting in the yard, at the beginnings of repair already taking shape. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. The corn made it through mostly intact, he said. Some damage on the edges of the field where the wind hit hardest, but the majority survived. The wheat took more damage, but it might still come through if we get good weather from here on out. That's good news, Martha said firmly. Better than you probably expected. It is. Jonas looked at Evelyn. I'm sorry. I should have been here to help. I shouldn't have left you to deal with all this alone. I wasn't alone, Evelyn said, gesturing to Martha. And you needed to check the fields. We did what needed doing, that's all. Jonas shook his head slowly, a small smile tugging at his mouth despite the circumstances. You're tougher than you look, Evelyn Cross. Reed, she corrected without thinking. Evelyn Reed. The words hung in the air between them, significant in a way neither of them had quite expected. It was the first time Evelyn had claimed Jonas's name as her own, the first time she'd acknowledged out loud that this marriage, this strange partnership, was real in more than just legal terms. Jonas's eyes softened, and he looked at her like he was seeing something precious he'd been afraid to hope for. Evelyn Reed, he repeated quietly. I like the sound of that. Over the next week, the farm slowly came back to life. Tom Henley and several other men from the community came by to help rebuild the fence and repair the chicken coop. The women brought seeds and starter plants from their own gardens to help replant. It was an education in what community meant on the frontier, not just neighborliness but survival, the understanding that today's help would be repaid someday when the roles were reversed and another farm faced disaster. Evelyn worked alongside everyone, learning and helping and slowly earning her place among these people who'd been strangers just weeks ago. She learned to drive fence posts and mend chicken wire, to transplant seedlings and build up raised beds that would resist the next storm's erosion. Her hands developed calluses, and her arms grew stronger, and she fell into bed each night so exhausted she barely had energy to talk to Jonas before sleep claimed her. But she made the effort anyway, because those nighttime conversations had become precious to them both, a time when they could shed the day's burdens and just be two people learning each other's hearts. Tell me about your mother, Evelyn said one night, lying in the darkness with her hand dangling over the edge of the bed, fingers loosely intertwined with Jonas's. What do you want to know? Everything, anything, what she was like, what she loved, what she dreamed about. Jonas was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. She loved music. She had a beautiful voice, used to sing while she worked. Old hymns mostly, but also folk songs her mother had taught her. When I was little, she'd sing me to sleep every night. I can't carry a tune to save my life, but I loved listening to her. What was her favorite song? Amazing Grace. She said it reminded her that no matter how hard life got, there was always hope for redemption, always a chance to start over. He paused. She would have liked you, Evelyn. She would have been glad I wasn't alone anymore. I wish I could have met her. So do I. She would have taught you things, shown you how to make her remedies and her preserves. She knew every useful plant on the prairie, every herb that could help, and every one that could harm. People used to come from miles around when someone was sick, because Sarah Reed could cure things the doctors couldn't. Do you remember any of it, what she taught you? Some. Not as much as I should. I was always more interested in the farming side of things, the crops and the animals. I wish now I'd paid more attention when she tried to teach me about her medicines. Evelyn squeezed his hand gently. Tell me what you do remember. I'll write it down. Help you preserve it. That way her knowledge doesn't die with her. Jonas's fingers tightened around hers, and in the darkness she heard him take a shaky breath. You do that? Of course. She was important to you, so she's important to me. Thank you, he whispered. That means more than I can say. So Jonas began sharing what he remembered of his mother's knowledge, and Evelyn wrote it down in the margins of an old ledger book, recipes for poultices and tinctures, notes about which plants bloomed when and what they could be used for, the accumulated wisdom of a frontier healer preserved in careful handwriting. It became their project, something they worked on together in the evenings, and in the process of preserving Sarah Reed's legacy, they were building something of their own. July arrived with scorching heat that baked the prairie hard and made every task twice as difficult. The corn grew tall and green, drinking up what rain came and stretching toward the pitiless sun. The garden they'd replanted struggled but survived, producing enough to give them hope for the winter ahead. Evelyn learned to work in the early morning and late evening, resting during the worst heat of the day, and her skin tanned despite her efforts to avoid it. "You're turning into a proper farm wife," Martha observed one day when she stopped by with fresh eggs from her own chickens. "Your hands tell the story." Evelyn looked down at her hands, calloused and rough now, nails broken short, nothing like the soft, useless hands she'd had in Lawrence. "I barely recognize myself anymore," she admitted. "Is that good or bad?" "I don't know yet. Different, certainly." Martha settled into a chair at the kitchen table, accepting the cup of water Evelyn offered. "Can I tell you something? When I first heard about you and Jonas, I thought it was a terrible idea. A town girl married to a struggling farmer out of desperation. I gave it 6 months before you ran back to civilization." "What changed your mind?" "You did. The way you've worked to make this place a home. The way you look at Jonas when you think nobody's watching. The way he looks at you." Martha smiled. "That boy was dying inside before you came." "Oh, he'd have kept going. Jonas is too stubborn to quit, but he was dying by inches, loneliness eating him alive. You brought him back to life." "I don't know if I've done that much. You don't see what I see. You don't see how he smiles now, how he talks to the other men at church about his wife and what she's learning to do around the farm. You don't hear the pride in his voice when he mentions you." Martha reached across the table and patted Evelyn's hand. "Whatever this started as, it's becoming something real. Don't be afraid of that." After Martha left, Evelyn stood at the window watching Jonas work in the distance and let herself really think about what the older woman had said. Was it becoming something real? And more importantly, was she ready for that? She thought about the way her heart lifted when she heard Jonas's footsteps on the porch at the end of each day. About the way she'd started leaving small comforts for him, fresh water by his pallet, his shirt mended without being asked, biscuits saved from breakfast because she knew he liked them. About the way she'd catch herself watching him work, admiring the strength in his arms and the concentration on his face. And she thought about the way he treated her, with unfailing kindness and patience, with respect for her opinions and gratitude for her help, with careful touches that asked permission rather than demanding access. He'd kept every promise he'd made to her, honored every boundary she'd set, and slowly, so slowly she'd barely noticed it happening, those boundaries had started to feel less like protection and more like barriers keeping them apart. That evening, as they sat together after supper, Evelyn made a decision. "Jonas," she said, her heart pounding, "you don't have to sleep on the floor anymore." He went very still, his hands frozen on the harness he'd been mending. "Evelyn, I'm not saying—" She took a breath, steadying herself. "I'm not saying we have to do anything, just that the floor is uncomfortable and the bed is big enough for 2 people and we're married. We should be able to share a bed without it meaning anything more than practicality." Jonas set down the harness carefully, his expression unreadable. "Are you sure? I don't want you to feel pressured." "I'm sure. You've slept on that hard floor for weeks now. It's ridiculous. We're both adults. We can share a bed without—" She trailed off, feeling her face heat. "All right," Jonas said quietly. "If you're certain. But Evelyn, I need you to know. I'm not expecting anything. Not now, not ever, unless you want it to. This changes nothing except where I sleep." That night they lay side by side in Sarah Reed's bed, careful not to touch, both acutely aware of the other's presence in a way that made sleep seem impossible. The bed felt smaller than it had when Evelyn slept alone, the space between them charged with unspoken possibility. "Jonas?" Evelyn whispered into the darkness. Yes? Thank you for being patient with me, for not pushing. You don't have to thank me for basic decency. Don't I? Most men wouldn't. She stopped, thinking about Daniel and his empty promises, about her father, and his casual cruelty in selling her future. Most men wouldn't have been as kind as you've been. Jonas rolled onto his side, and she could feel him looking at her even though she couldn't see his face in the dark. Then most men are fools. Evelyn, you're the best thing that's happened to me in years. You think I'd risk losing you by being impatient or demanding? You think I'd throw away this chance at building something good just to satisfy temporary wants? What do you want, Jonas? Long term, I mean, from this marriage, from me. He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, I want partnership. I want someone to work beside and laugh with and share the burden of survival. I want to build something that outlasts us both, a farm that thrives, maybe children someday if you want them, a life that means something. And I want, he paused, choosing his words carefully. I want you to be happy here, to choose this life not because you have to, but because you want to. That's what I want most of all. Evelyn's throat tightened with emotion. And if I wanted more than partnership, if I wanted, then I'd thank God every day for being luckier than I deserve, Jonas said softly. But only when you're ready. Only when it's real for you too, not just gratitude or obligation. Evelyn rolled onto her side, facing him in the darkness. The space between them felt like both a chasm and a hair's breadth. Jonas Reed, you are the most frustratingly noble man I've ever met. She heard rather than saw his smile. I'll take that as a compliment. You should. And then, before she could overthink it, before fear could stop her, Evelyn closed the distance between them and kissed him. It was tentative and brief, barely more than a brush of lips, but it sent warmth flooding through her entire body. Jonas went very still, like he was afraid any movement might shatter the moment, and when Evelyn pulled back, she could hear his breath coming quick and shallow. Evelyn, he said, and her name sounded like a prayer. I'm ready, she whispered. Not for everything, not all at once, but for this, for trying, for seeing what this could become if we both choose it. Jonas reached up slowly and cupped her face with one calloused hand, his touch gentle despite the strength in his fingers. Are you sure? I need you to be sure. Instead of answering with words, Evelyn kissed him again, longer this time, deeper, letting her actions speak what she was still learning to feel. And Jonas kissed her back with reverent intensity, like she was something precious and miraculous, like he couldn't quite believe this was real. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Jonas pressed his forehead against hers. We'll go slow, he promised, as slow as you need. I know. I trust you. And she did. Somewhere in the past weeks of working side by side and choosing each other daily, trust had grown like the corn in the fields, slowly at first, then strong and sure, reaching toward the light. They lay tangled together that night, Evelyn's head on Jonas's chest, his arms wrapped securely around her, and for the first time since this marriage began, it felt less like an arrangement and more like a choice, less like survival and more like living. The next morning, Evelyn woke to find Jonas already awake, watching her with an expression so tender it made her breath catch. Good morning, he murmured, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Good morning. She smiled up at him, feeling shy and brave all at once. No regrets? Not a single one. You? No, just hope. Is that strange? If it is, we're strange together. Jonas kissed her forehead. I need to check on the field, see how the corn's coming. But tonight, I was thinking maybe we could ride out to the creek. It's beautiful at sunset, and it's been so hot. A swim might be nice. I'd like that. The day passed in its usual rhythm of work and heat, but there was a new lightness to it, a sense of possibility that hadn't been there before. Evelyn caught herself humming while she worked, her mother's old songs, the ones she'd thought she'd forgotten. The house felt less like a cage and more like a home she was actively building rather than just inhabiting. True to his word, Jonas came to find her as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. They walked together across the prairie toward the creek that ran along the eastern edge of the property, following a path worn smooth by Jonas's countless trips for water. The evening air was cooler but still warm, and the grass was tall and golden on either side of them. The creek was indeed beautiful, a ribbon of clear water cutting through the prairie, lined with cottonwood trees that provided precious shade. Jonas had been right about it being a good place to swim. He'd brought towels and even a blanket to sit on, planning ahead in a way that made Evelyn's heart warm. They swam in the shallows, the water cool and clean, washing away the day's sweat and dust. Evelyn hadn't been swimming since she was a child, and she laughed with surprised delight at how good it felt, how free. Jonas swam with easy confidence, obviously familiar with this place, and he showed her where the water was deepest and where the current was strongest. Afterward, they sat on the blanket in the fading light, letting the warm air dry them, and watched the sun paint the sky in shades of fire. Jonas's arm was around her shoulders, and Evelyn leaned into him, content in a way she hadn't been since childhood. "I used to come here when things got hard," Jonas said quietly. "After my father died, after my mother got sick. This place always made me feel less alone. Thank you for sharing it with me. I want to share everything with you, the good places and the hard work and the uncertain future. All of it." He turned to look at her. "Evelyn, I know this isn't what you would have chosen if circumstances had been different, but I'm choosing you now, freely, because you're exactly who I want beside me for whatever comes next." Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming rightness of this moment, this man, this improbable life they were building together from broken pieces. "I'm choosing you too," she whispered, "not because I have to, because I want to." They kissed as the sun set and the stars began to emerge one by one, like promises scattered across the darkening sky. And when they finally walked home through the prairie night, hand in hand, Evelyn realized that somewhere along the way she'd stopped mourning the life she'd lost and started building the life she'd found. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy. But it was theirs, chosen and real, and that made all the difference. The weeks that followed their evening at the creek brought a deepening intimacy that transformed everything between them. Jonas no longer slept with careful distance between them, but pulled Evelyn close each night, her back against his chest, his arm wrapped protectively around her waist. They woke tangled together, shared kisses over morning coffee, and touched each other constantly throughout the day, small gestures of affection that spoke of comfort and belonging. The corn grew tall and strong, the tassels appearing in late July just as Jonas had predicted. He walked Evelyn through the fields, showing her how to check for ears forming, explaining the delicate balance of sun and rain that would determine whether they prospered or merely survived the coming winter. She listened and learned, asking questions that made him smile, and together they tended what they'd planted with hope that felt less fragile than it once had. But August brought trouble in an unexpected form. Evelyn was hanging laundry on the line one sweltering afternoon when she heard the sound of a horse approaching. She turned to see a well-dressed man on a fine bay mare, and her stomach dropped in recognition even before he removed his hat. Marcus Thornton, the man her father had owed money to, the man whose debt had led to her marriage. "Mrs. Reed," Thornton said, his voice smooth as oil and twice as slick. "What a pleasure to see you looking so well. Farm life clearly agrees with you." "Mr. Thornton," Evelyn kept her voice neutral, though her heart was racing. "What brings you all the way out here?" "Business, I'm afraid. Is your husband at home?" "He's checking the north fence. Should be back within the hour." "Perfect. I'll wait." Thornton dismounted and tied his horse to the fence post, making himself comfortable without invitation. "I must say, I was surprised to hear about your marriage. Thomas Cross assured me his daughter was too refined for frontier life. Yet here you are, hanging laundry like any common farm wife." The condescension in his voice made Evelyn's hands clench in the wet fabric she held. "I'm exactly where I choose to be, Mr. Thornton. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to finish." Of course. Don't let me keep you." But he didn't leave, just stood there watching her with calculating eyes that made her skin crawl. She was relieved when Jonas appeared 20 minutes later, riding up on the mule with his shirt soaked through with sweat and his expression darkening the moment he saw their visitor. "Thornton," Jonas said flatly, dismounting, "what do you want?" "Now, is that any way to greet the man who made your marriage possible?" Thornton's smile didn't reach his eyes. I've come to discuss your debt, Mr. Reed. You borrowed quite a sum from various sources to settle Thomas Cross's obligation to me. I've been buying up those debts, paid them off at a discount from your creditors who'd lost faith in your ability to repay. Jonas went very still. What are you saying? I'm saying I now hold all your outstanding loans, which means you owe me directly, $800 plus the accumulated interest, which brings the total to just over $900. Thornton pulled a sheaf of papers from his jacket. All legal and properly documented, as you'll see. Evelyn moved to stand beside Jonas, her hand finding his. His fingers were ice cold despite the heat. The original terms gave me 5 years to repay, Jonas said carefully. The original terms, yes, but as the new holder of the debt, I'm within my rights to call it in early if I have reason to believe you can't pay. And looking at this place, Thornton gestured dismissively at the modest farm, I have serious doubts about your solvency. The corn's coming in strong. The harvest will cover what I owe with some to spare. Perhaps. Or perhaps a hailstorm destroys it all next week, or drought withers it, or any of 1,000 disasters that befall farmers every year. Thornton's expression hardened. I want my money, Reed, and I want it by the end of September, 2 months. That gives you time to harvest and sell. If you can't pay, I'll foreclose and take the land. You can't do that, Evelyn said, her voice shaking with fury. That's not enough time. I can, and I will. It's all perfectly legal. Thornton mounted his horse, looking down at them with barely concealed contempt. 2 months, Reed. Don't disappoint me. He rode away, leaving a cloud of dust and devastation in his wake. Jonas stood frozen, the papers clutched in his white-knuckled hands. Evelyn could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. The math that didn't add up, the timeline that was impossible, the dream slipping away like water through desperate fingers. How much will the harvest bring? She asked quietly. If everything goes perfectly? Maybe $600 after I set aside seed for next year and feed for the animals. That leaves us $300 short, and there's no way to make up that difference in 2 months. Jonas's voice was hollow, defeated. He's going to take the farm, Evelyn. Everything my parents built, everything we've worked for, he's going to take it all. Then we fight. We find a way. There is no way. I've already borrowed from everyone who'd lend to me. The bank won't give me more credit. I don't have anything left to sell except the land itself, and if I sell land, I won't have enough to farm successfully anyway. He turned to look at her, and the pain in his eyes was devastating. I'm so sorry. I brought you here, made you build a life here, and now I'm going to lose it all. Stop. Evelyn grabbed his face in both hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. Stop apologizing for things that aren't your fault. Thornton is a predator who saw an opportunity to steal land from a struggling farmer. This isn't on you. But you'll lose everything too. The home you've been building, the community you've found. I'll still have you. That's what matters. And as she said it, Evelyn realized it was completely true. Somewhere in these past months, Jonas had become more important to her than security or stability or any of the things she'd thought she needed. We'll figure this out together. Jonas pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly it almost hurt. I don't deserve you, he whispered against her hair. Good thing you're stuck with me anyway. That evening, they sat at the kitchen table surrounded by papers and calculations, trying to find a solution that didn't exist. No matter how they added the numbers, they came up short. Even if the harvest exceeded expectations, even if they sold everything that wasn't essential to survival, they couldn't raise $900 in 2 months. There has to be something we're missing, Evelyn insisted, going over the figures for the dozenth time. Some option we haven't considered. There isn't. I've been over this 100 times since Thornton left. Jonas rubbed his face wearily. We're trapped, and he knows it. A knock at the door interrupted them. Jonas opened it to find Tom and Martha Henley standing on the porch, along with Helen Morrison and her husband Charles. We heard, Martha said without preamble. News travels fast. Thornton stopped at Patterson's store in town, bragging about how he was going to own the Reed place by October. Come to gloat? Jonas asked bitterly. Come to help, you stubborn fool, Tom replied. You think you're the only one Thornton's tried to destroy? He's been buying up debts and foreclosing on farms for years, stealing land from people who can't fight back. We're tired of watching it happen. They filed into the small house, and Martha set a ledger book on the table. We took up a collection. Every family in the community who could spare anything contributed. It's not much, maybe $150 total, but it's something. Jonas stared at the ledger, his throat working. I can't accept this. You all need that money for your own families. And we'll all need neighbors when the next disaster hits, Charles Morrison said firmly. That's how community works, Jonas. We pool our resources, we help each other survive. You've helped plenty of us in the past. Now let us help you. It's still not enough, Evelyn said quietly, though her heart was full at this display of generosity. We'd still be $700 short. We know. That's why we came up with another idea. Martha looked between Jonas and Evelyn. What if we all bought shares in your harvest? You sell us a portion of your corn and wheat now at a guaranteed price, and we pay you in advance. It's a risk for us. If the harvest fails, we lose our money. But if it succeeds, we all benefit. Jonas shook his head slowly. That's insane. You'd be gambling your own security on my crops. No more than you gambled on Evelyn, Tom said, and that seems to have worked out well enough. We've already discussed it among ourselves, Helen added. We can raise another $400 this way. That gets you to $550. You'd only need $350 more. The number was still impossibly large, but it was smaller than before. For the first time since Thornton's visit, Evelyn felt a flicker of hope. Where would we get the rest? She asked. The room fell silent. No one had an answer. Finally, Jonas spoke. I could sell the cow and the chickens. That might bring in $50, maybe $60 if I'm lucky. You need the cow for milk, Martha protested, and the chickens for eggs. You can't survive winter without them. We can't survive winter without the farm, Jonas countered. But you're right, even with that, we'd still be nearly $300 short. Evelyn's mind raced, turning over possibilities, discarding them one by one. Then an idea struck her, so obvious she couldn't believe she hadn't thought of it immediately. My parents, she said, they owe me this. My father sold me to pay his debts. The least he can do is help save the life he forced me into. Jonas looked at her sharply. Evelyn, no. I won't have you begging your father for money after what he did to you. I'm not begging. I'm demanding what's owed. Evelyn stood, her jaw set with determination. He destroyed my future for his convenience. He can sacrifice some of his comfort for mine. If he's managed to rebuild any kind of life in Lawrence, he can contribute to saving ours. And if he refuses, then I'll know exactly what I'm worth to him, and I'll never waste another thought on him again. She turned to Martha. Can someone drive me to town tomorrow? I need to visit my parents. Martha nodded. Tom can take you, and I'm coming with you. Your father's going to answer for what he did, one way or another. After their neighbors left, full of promises to spread word of their plan and gather more support, Jonas and Evelyn stood alone in the quiet house. Jonas pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. You don't have to do this, he said quietly. I know seeing your parents will be painful. Pain is temporary. Losing this farm, losing what we've built here, that would be permanent. Evelyn pulled back to look at him. Besides, I'm stronger now than I was when they sent me away. They don't have power over me anymore. When did you become so fierce? When I married a poor farmer who taught me that survival isn't about comfort, it's about choosing what matters and fighting for it. She kissed him softly. You matter, Jonas Reed. This life we're building matters, and I'm not letting Thornton or my father or anyone else take it from us. The next morning, Tom Henley arrived with his wagon, and Martha climbed up beside him with grim determination on her face. Evelyn wore her green dress, the one Jonas had bought her with traded eggs, and carried herself with a confidence she'd learned from months of hard work and harder choices. The ride to Lawrence felt both endless and too short. Evelyn's stomach churned with anxiety and anger as familiar landmarks appeared, the church where she'd been married, the general store, the boarding house where her parents had sent her away to save themselves. Tom pulled the wagon to a stop outside the boarding house, and Evelyn took a deep breath before climbing down. We'll wait here, Martha said. But if you need us, you just call out. Evelyn nodded and walked to the door, her heart pounding. She knocked firmly, and after a moment her mother answered. Margaret Cross looked older than Evelyn remembered, more worn, but she was dressed well enough, better than she'd been wearing the day of the wedding. Evelyn? Her mother's hand flew to her chest. What are you doing here? Is something wrong? I need to speak with Father. Is he here? He's... Yes, he's inside. But darling, you look so different. So... She trailed off, taking in Evelyn's sun-browned skin and work-roughened hands. I look like someone who works for a living. May I come in? Her mother stepped aside and Evelyn entered the boarding house. It was the same place, but they'd moved to a different room, larger, with actual furniture instead of the sparse basics they'd had before. Someone had been spending money. Her father sat at a table playing cards by himself, and he looked up when Evelyn entered. His eyes widened in shock. Evie? What are you... How did you... I need to talk to you about money, Evelyn said, cutting straight to the point. Both of you, sit down. Something in her voice made them obey. Evelyn remained standing, looking down at her parents with a mixture of anger and bitter understanding. The man you sold me to, Jonas Reed, is about to lose his farm because of the debt he took on to pay for me, she began. Marcus Thornton bought up all Jonas's loans and is calling them in early, demanding $900 in 2 months, or he forecloses. We're trying to raise the money, and we're close, but we're still $300 short. Her father's face went pale. Evelyn, we don't have that kind of money. Don't lie to me, Father. I can see you've improved your circumstances. This room costs more than the one you had before. Mother's wearing a new dress. You've clearly found some way to make money since you sold your daughter. That's not fair, her mother protested. We did what we had to do to survive, and now I'm doing what I have to do to survive. Evelyn leaned forward, her hands flat on the table. You owe me this. You took my future and sold it to the highest bidder. The very least, you can do is help me keep what I've built from those ashes. Thomas Cross rubbed his face with both hands. Evie, even if we wanted to help, we don't have $300. I've been working at the mill, and your mother takes in sewing, but we barely make enough to get by. Then how do you afford this room? How do you afford Mother's new dress? Her parents exchanged a guilty look, and Evelyn's stomach sank with understanding. You won the money gambling, didn't you? She said flatly. You paid off one debt by selling me, and now you're gambling again. It's not like that. Then what is it like, Father? Tell me. Explain to me how you're living comfortably while I work myself to exhaustion every day just to keep food on the table. Explain why your comfort matters more than my survival. We didn't know it would be this hard for you, her mother said, tears starting to flow. Jonas Reed seemed like a decent man. He is a decent man. The best man I've ever known, which says terrible things about every other man in my life, doesn't it? Evelyn straightened, fighting to keep her voice steady. He's kind and hardworking and honorable in ways you clearly don't understand. And he's about to lose everything because he borrowed money to buy me from you. So I'm demanding that you help. Sell your furniture, take out a loan, win at gambling if that's what you do now. I don't care how you get the money. Just get it. Her father stood, his face flushed with anger. You can't come in here and demand money from us. We're your parents. You stopped being my parents the day you sold me, Evelyn shot back. Parents protect their children. They sacrifice for them. They don't auction them off to pay gambling debts. So no, you don't get to claim that relationship now when it's convenient for you. The silence that followed was terrible and absolute. Finally, Thomas Cross sat back down heavily. I have some money, he admitted quietly. Not 300, but maybe 150. I've been saving it, planning to... He trailed off, unable to meet Evelyn's eyes. Planning to what? Gamble it away? Drink it away? Evelyn's voice was sharp as broken glass. Give it to me. It's the least you owe me. Thomas, we need that money, her mother protested. We need our daughter's forgiveness more, he replied. He stood and went to a lockbox on the shelf, pulling out a stack of bills and counting them slowly. It's $163. It's everything I have. He held out the money, and Evelyn took it with shaking hands. It wasn't enough, they'd still be over 100 short, but it was something. It was more than she'd expected, honestly. Thank you, she said quietly. This helps. Will it be enough? Her mother asked. To save the farm? I don't know, but it's more than you've ever given me before. Evelyn tucked the money into her pocket and headed for the door. She paused with her hand on the knob and looked back at her parents. These people who'd shaped her childhood and destroyed her adolescence, who'd given her life and then sold her future. If we lose the farm, if Thornton takes everything, Jonas and I will survive, she said. We'll start over somewhere else, build something new. We're strong enough for that now. But you, I don't know if you'll ever be strong enough to live with what you did. I hope for your sake that you figure out how. She left without waiting for a response, walking out into the bright Kansas sunshine where Martha and Tom waited with the wagon. Well? Martha asked. $163. Evelyn climbed up onto the wagon seat. It's not enough, but it's something. Then we keep fighting, Tom said, snapping the reins. There's still time. On the ride back to the farm, Evelyn counted and recounted the money, as if doing so might make more appear. Combined with what they'd already raised, they now had over $700. They needed $900. They were so close, and yet the gap might as well have been a canyon. When they arrived at the farm, they found Jonas in the fields with several other men from the community. He saw the wagon and came running, his face desperate with hope. Well, he called out, did they help? Evelyn held up the money. $163. My father gave me everything he had. The hope in Jonas's eyes flickered, but didn't die. He took her in his arms and held her tight. That's more than I expected, he said. Thank you. Thank you for being brave enough to face them. We're still short, she whispered against his chest. Over $100 short. I don't know where else to turn. Then we'll sell everything else we can. The farm tools, the furniture, my mother's things. Jonas's voice was steady, but she could hear the pain in it. Whatever it takes. Over the next week, they scraped together every possible dollar. Jonas sold tools they'd need to replace eventually. Evelyn sold the sewing basket she'd come to love, the beautiful sweetgrass creation that had belonged to Sarah Reed. Martha and the other women organized a bake sale in town, raising another $40. The men pooled their resources to buy more shares in the harvest at inflated prices, gambling their own security on Jonas's success. By the end of August, they had $875. They were $25 short. $25, so little, and yet it might as well have been $1,000. There was nothing left to sell, no one left to borrow from. They'd exhausted every option, and they'd still come up short. Jonas sat at the kitchen table the night before the payment was due, staring at the neatly stacked bills with hollow eyes. We lost, he said quietly. We fought as hard as we could, and we lost anyway. No, Evelyn's voice was fierce. We haven't lost yet. There's still time. Time to do what? Pull money from thin air? Pray for a miracle? Jonas laughed bitterly. I appreciate your optimism, but we need to be realistic. Tomorrow Thornton comes, and we won't have what he's owed, and he'll take the farm. We need to start planning for what comes next. What comes next is we find $25. Evelyn paced the small room, her mind racing. There has to be something we haven't thought of, something we've missed. A knock at the door made them both jump. Jonas opened it to find Catherine Patterson standing on the porch, clutching a small bag. Mrs. Patterson, Jonas said, clearly confused. It's late. Is something wrong? No, Catherine looked past him to Evelyn. May I come in? I have something for you. They led her inside and Catherine set the bag on the table. Her hands were shaking as she opened it and pulled out a stack of bills. It's $25, she said quietly. I heard in town that you were still short, that you'd done everything you could, but it wasn't enough. And I couldn't, her voice broke, I couldn't let you lose everything when I have this money sitting in a drawer, money from a man who doesn't love me, money I've been saving to run away somewhere. But I'm not brave enough to run. You're brave enough to stay, to fight. So you should have it. Evelyn stared at the money, then at Catherine. I can't take this. It's your escape money. You might need it someday. If I haven't used it by now, I never will. Catherine pushed the money toward them. Please, let me do this one good thing. Let me help save what you and Jonas have built. You deserve this happiness, Evelyn. You deserve a life you've chosen. Take the money. Evelyn looked at Jonas, who nodded slowly. She took the money with trembling hands. Thank you, she whispered. Catherine, I don't know how to thank you. You already did. When you told me I wasn't alone in being trapped, that we were all doing our best in impossible circumstances. That meant more than you know." Catherine smiled sadly. "Maybe someday I'll be as brave as you. Until then, at least I can help someone else's courage matter." She left quickly, not waiting for more thanks, and Jonas and Evelyn stood staring at the complete sum, $900 exactly, raised through the combined desperation and generosity of an entire community. "We did it," Jonas said, his voice full of wonder. "We actually did it." Evelyn laughed through tears. "We did. All of us together. We saved the farm." The next day, when Marcus Thornton arrived with smug confidence and legal papers, Jonas met him with the full $900 in cash. Thornton's face went from satisfaction to shock to fury as he counted the money twice, looking for some way to declare it insufficient. "It's all there," Jonas said calmly. $900 plus the penny extra for your trouble. The debt is paid in full. Now get off my land." "This isn't over, Reed," Thornton snarled. "I'll find another way." "No, you won't." Tom Henley stepped forward from where he'd been standing with a group of other farmers. A dozen men who'd come to witness this moment and make sure Thornton honored the agreement. "You've been stealing land from struggling farmers for too long, Thornton. We're done letting it happen. You try this again with anyone in this community, and you'll find every door in the county closed to you. Your store will get no customers, your land will get no workers, and your reputation will be ruined. We take care of our own out here." Thornton looked around at the hard faces surrounding him and seemed to realize he was beaten. He pocketed the money and rode away without another word, his horse kicking up dust that settled slowly back to earth. The moment he was out of sight, a cheer went up from the assembled community. Jonas pulled Evelyn into his arms and kissed her thoroughly while their neighbors laughed and applauded. "We did it," he whispered against her lips. "We actually did it." "We did," Evelyn agreed, together. The harvest that year was the best Jonas's farm had seen in a decade. The corn came in tall and heavy with ears, the wheat golden and thick. Jonas and Evelyn worked side by side from dawn to dusk, bringing in the crops that would feed them through winter and repay their debts to the community. The work was backbreaking and endless, but they did it with grateful hearts and strong hands. True to their word, Jonas sold portions of the harvest to the neighbors who'd bought shares, paying them back with generous measure. The rest he sold in town for good prices, and by the end of October they had not only survived but begun to rebuild their depleted resources. On a cold November evening, as the first snow of winter dusted the prairie white, Jonas and Evelyn sat together in Sarah Reed's rocking chair, Jonas holding Evelyn close while the fire crackled in the stove and wind howled outside. "I have something for you," Jonas said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small wooden box, beautifully carved with a pattern of stars that matched the quilt. "I made it over the past month, working on it in the evenings while you were writing in your journal." Evelyn opened the box to find a ring, simple silver with a small stone that caught the firelight. "Jonas, we can't afford—" "I traded for it. Gave Mr. Patterson a cord of wood and some eggs in exchange. It's not fancy, but it's real. And I wanted you to have it because this—" He gestured between them. "This is real too. What started as desperation became partnership, and partnership became something more. I love you, Evelyn Reed. Not because circumstances forced us together, but because you're brave and fierce and kind, and every day with you is better than the day before." Tears streamed down Evelyn's face as Jonas slipped the ring onto her finger. "I love you too," she whispered. "I didn't think I could, didn't think I wanted to, but somewhere between the storms and the work and the daily choosing of each other, I fell completely in love with you." They kissed slowly, tenderly, and when they pulled apart, Jonas smiled. "My mother used to say that the best marriages are built like barns, not in a single day of passion, but piece by piece with the help of community and the strength of committed work." Smart woman, your mother. She was, and she'd be so proud of you, of what you've become out here, of what we've built together. Outside, snow continued to fall softly over the prairie, covering everything in peaceful white. Inside their small house that had become a true home, Jonas and Evelyn held each other close and watched the fire burn, thinking about the future they'd fought so hard to keep. Spring came again, as it always does, and with it brought new life to the farm. Eveline planted Sarah Reed's garden with seeds saved from the previous year and new varieties traded from Martha. The chickens Jonas had been forced to sell were replaced with chicks that Eveline raised with patient care. The cow they'd lost was replaced by a younger heifer that Tom Henley sold them at cost, saying it was an investment in the community's future. On a warm April morning, Eveline woke feeling different, a subtle change in her body that she recognized instinctively. She said nothing to Jonas at first, waiting until she was certain, but when 2 more months passed and there was no doubt, she took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "There's someone else here now," she said softly. "Someone we made together. A child who'll grow up knowing they were wanted and loved, not sold or bartered, but chosen every single day." Jonas's eyes filled with tears as he pulled her close. "A baby," he whispered. "We're going to have a baby. We are. Our family. Our future. Everything we fought for, made real." The baby came in December, a healthy boy with his father's gray eyes and his mother's determination. They named him Thomas, after Jonas's father, but also as a gesture of complicated forgiveness toward Eveline's father, not absolution for what he'd done, but acknowledgement that without his desperate choice, this life they'd built would never have existed. Thomas Cross and Margaret Cross came to see their grandson that first spring, arriving at the farm with tentative hope and carefully chosen words. The visit was awkward and strained, but when Eveline placed baby Thomas in her father's arms and saw him cry with genuine emotion, something hard inside her chest softened just slightly. "I don't forgive you," she told her father quietly, while Jonas took her mother to see the garden. "Not completely, maybe not ever. But I'm choosing not to let what you did poison the rest of my life. I have too much good here to waste time on bitterness." "I don't deserve your grace," Thomas whispered, looking down at his grandson. "But I'm grateful for it anyway. And I'm sorry, Evie, for everything. I know it doesn't change anything, but I'm so sorry." "I know." And she did. She could see in her father's haunted eyes that he carried the weight of what he'd done, that he'd never truly be free of it. That was burden enough without her adding to it. Years passed, marked by the changing seasons and the slow accumulation of small joys. The farm prospered under Jonas and Eveline's careful stewardship. They added another room to the house, then another, making space for the children who came, 3 in total, each one wanted and celebrated. The corn grew tall every summer. The garden produced abundantly, and the community they joined became family in the truest sense. Martha Henley became grandmother in spirit to the Reed children, teaching them the same wisdom she'd shared with Eveline years before. Tom helped Jonas expand the farm, buying additional acreage when a neighbor moved east and wanted to sell. The Morrison barn they'd helped raise hosted weddings and celebrations, including the one where young Thomas Reed married Helen Morrison's granddaughter in a ceremony that brought joy instead of desperation. And through it all, Jonas and Eveline chose each other daily, in the hard times and the good times, in moments of laughter and moments of tears, in the mundane work of living and the profound grace of love built slowly and deliberately. Their marriage had been born of necessity and desperation, but it became something neither had imagined possible, a partnership so deep and true that neither could remember a time when they hadn't been 2 halves of a single whole. On their 20th wedding anniversary, they stood together at the creek where Jonas had first brought her on that pivotal summer evening long ago. The cottonwoods were taller now, and they'd grown taller too. Not in height, but in wisdom, and strength, and understanding. "If you could go back," Jonas asked, "knowing what you know now, would you change anything?" Eveline thought about the girl she'd been, frightened and angry, standing at that altar beside a stranger, thinking her life was over. She thought about the years of hard work and harder choices, of storms weathered and harvests celebrated, of a community that had saved them when they couldn't save themselves. She thought about their children sleeping safely in the house they'd built together, about the life they'd created from broken pieces. "Not a single thing," she said. "Every hardship led us here. Every struggle made us stronger. I wouldn't trade this life for any other, not even the one I thought I wanted back then." Jonas kissed her softly, the way he had on their wedding night when he'd promised her safety instead of demanding intimacy. "I'm the luckiest man alive," he murmured, "to have been given you as a gift and to have earned you as a choice." "We earned each other," Eveline corrected. That's what makes this real, not the circumstances that brought us together, but the daily decision to stay together. Not the desperation that married us, but the love that keeps us married. As the sun set over the prairie, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Jonas and Evelyn Reed walked home hand in hand. Two people who'd been strangers forced together by desperation, who'd become partners through necessity, and who'd become soulmates through the thousand small choices that make up a life well lived. Behind them, the creek sang its endless song. Before them, their house glowed warm with lamplight and the sounds of their children's laughter. Around them, the prairie stretched infinite and unchanging, witness to their unlikely love story, a story that began with a transaction but became something far more precious. A story that proved love isn't always lightning strikes and grand gestures. Sometimes it's patience and daily kindness. Sometimes it's choosing someone when you don't have to, when circumstances no longer force the choice. Sometimes the greatest love stories are the ones built piece by piece, day by day, with calloused hands and grateful hearts. And sometimes the poorest farmer has more to offer than the richest man, not in gold or comfort or easy promises, but in the things that truly matter: honor, partnership, and the courage to build something beautiful from broken beginnings. That night, as Jonas and Evelyn lay tangled together in the bed that had once felt too small to share, they fell asleep holding hands, just as they had on that first tentative night when they were still learning to trust each other. 20 years later, the gesture meant something different, but just as profound. They were choosing each other, still, always, forever. And that made all the difference.